It told you that if you just thought a little more, planned a little harder, worried a little longer, you'd finally feel safe, finally feel in control. But instead, all that thinking made it worse. You're not clearer, you're not calmer, you're tired, mentally exhausted, stuck in a loop that never stops spinning. They told you overthinking means you're smart, that being prepared means being safe. But no one told you what it really costs, the sleep you can't get, the peace you've forgotten, the moments you miss because your mind won't stop racing. But here's the truth. Peace doesn't come from solving every problem in your head. It comes from seeing that not every thought deserves your attention, that not every loop needs to be closed, that stillness isn't weakness, it's power. And that's what Buddhism teaches, not in temples high on mountains, but in real life. In the breath you've been ignoring, in the silence between thoughts, in the space where overthinking used to live. Tonight, these teachings will do more than help you sleep. They'll help you let go, not by force, but by understanding. As you listen, your mind will start to unclench. The grip of thought will loosen, and a calm you've been chasing for years will quietly settle in. By the time you wake up, you won't just feel rested. You'll feel free. Ready? Let's begin. And now that the noise of the day has started to quiet, the real work begins. Not the work of fixing, solving, or controlling, but the deeper work of release. The soft, powerful work of letting go. Because the truth is, overthinking is not just about thoughts. It's about resistance. It's the tension between what happened and what we wish happened. The friction between how we feel and how we think we should feel. And that friction? It shows up right here, in the body, in the breath, in the small ways we hold on without realizing it. There's a moment, just before sleep, where the body wants to let go, but the mind doesn't let it. That moment matters, because how you treat this moment determines the tone of your entire night. Do you carry your day with you into sleep, or do you gently set it down? Buddhist breath awareness isn't just about watching air move. It's about learning how to drop the weight, breath by breath, in micro moments so subtle they almost go unnoticed. But those moments, those tiny exhales of tension, are the quiet exit doors from suffering. Each one is a choice, hold on or release. And tonight, we learn how to choose release. Start by noticing the breath, not forcing it, not trying to deepen it, just noticing how it feels to breathe after a long day. There might be tightness, there might be restlessness. That's not failure, that's just honesty. That's the starting line. Buddhist practice begins exactly where you are, not where you should be. So if the breath feels heavy, that's okay. That heaviness is the very thing we're working with. That's the material of transformation. When we overthink, the breath gets shallow. When we're holding on to tension, the chest stiffens, the stomach locks up, the throat tightens. This isn't poetic, it's real biology. And this is where Buddhism meets neuroscience. The breath and the nervous system are best friends. When one softens, the other follows. And when you learn to soften your breath, you're not just relaxing, you're retraining your entire system to stop gripping life so tightly. Try this now. As you breathe in, say to yourself gently, I feel the breath. And as you breathe out, say, I let it go. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe it's a conversation that still lingers in your head. Maybe it's regret. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's nothing specific. Just that vague sense that something's not done yet. Let that be okay. You're not here to figure it all out. You're here to let the figuring fade. In Buddhist teachings, there's a word, vitakka vikara. It refers to the mental wandering, the constant picking up of thoughts and carrying them like luggage. But you can notice that picking up as it happens, not with anger, not with judgment. Just, there you are again. And then, let it pass. The point isn't to force the mind into stillness. The point is to become so gentle with yourself that even the storms lose their power. That's the real stillness, when nothing needs to be forced, because everything is allowed. Letting go is not a grand gesture. It's not standing on a mountain screaming, "I release you," into the wind. No, letting go is subtle. It's silent. It's what happens when you unclench your jaw without even realizing you are holding it tight. It's what happens when you feel sadness and don't immediately try to fix it. It's what happens when you trust that this breath, this single breath, is enough to begin again. Every inhale is new. Every exhale is a little death. And if you really listen, if you really stay with the breath as it moves in and out, you start to feel something shift. You feel that the breath isn't yours at all. It's not controlled. It's not possessed. It just moves, like life, like time. And in that realization, there's freedom. You don't have to micromanage your own experience. You don't have to rehearse the past or strategize the future. The breath shows you that life moves forward no matter what, even in sleep. The Buddha once said, "Just as a snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again." But how do you shed something you can't stop thinking about? You start by not reacting to it. When the mind says, "But what if?" you answer with the breath. When it says, "I should have," you answer with the breath. Not with more thoughts, not with arguments, just presence. The breath doesn't negotiate. It just is. You can start to feel the difference between thought and awareness. One is restless. The other is spacious. One loops. The other observes. This is the key to Buddhist breath awareness. It's not about controlling thought, but recognizing its texture. And once you recognize the texture of tension, you begin to loosen your grip on it. You begin to soften your relationship to thought itself. And when you soften, something amazing happens. The breath goes deeper on its own. The body adjusts. The shoulders drop. The stomach releases. The forehead smooths. These aren't just physical changes, they're messages. Your body is telling your mind, "We're safe now." You can stop running. Think about that. How many of your thoughts are just ways of running from something? From discomfort, from uncertainty, from loss, from truth. But the breath teaches you that it's okay to stop. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to be here, now, without a plan, without a solution, without a goal. There's a Buddhist phrase, anatta, no self. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means the you that's always narrating, judging, planning, comparing. That's not your core. That's just noise. And when you breathe deeply, the noise quiets. And underneath, there's something gentle, something kind, a presence that doesn't need fixing. Letting go isn't erasing the day. It's releasing the idea that it should have been different. The mind holds on to moments like a tightrope walker afraid to fall. But the truth is, there's no fall. There's only landing. Every breath is a landing. Every exhale is a safe return to the ground of now. You don't need to fix the thoughts to fall asleep. You just need to stop reacting to them. You don't need to untangle the whole story. You just need to stop pulling the thread. Thoughts are like bubbles. They pop on their own if you don't chase them. Let the chasing go. Let the mind wander without following. Let the breath be your home. Every time you get lost in a thought, return to the body. Feel the breath in your chest. Feel the air in your nose. Feel your hands where they rest. This is sacred territory, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. As you do this, you might notice waves of emotion. That's okay. That's normal. When the mind quiets, the heart speaks. And sometimes it speaks grief, or fear, or love, or sadness. Don't run. Let it move through. The breath will carry it. It always does. The more you let go, the more natural it becomes. And the more natural it becomes, the less you need to force it. This is the paradox of letting go. You don't do it. You stop doing. You stop clinging. Stop replaying. Stop fixing. And the silence that remains, that's peace. Not empty, not numb, just still. Right now, your breath is doing all the work. Your only job is to trust it. Let go of your grip on the day. Not because the day was perfect, not because everything's resolved, but because holding on doesn't help. The breath will carry what you don't need. The breath will hold what you're too tired to carry. Just follow it. No story, no judgment, just breath, just peace. And as your breath deepens, so does your rest. The body enters its own rhythm. The heart slows. The nervous system starts to shift. This isn't sleep forced by exhaustion. It's sleep welcomed by trust. You're not escaping the day. You're releasing it. Thoughts may still come, but they no longer stick. Like leaves on a river, they float. And you remain here, breathing, softening, releasing. And maybe for the first time in a long time, nothing needs to happen next. No solutions, no plans, just the gentle breath of letting go. And tomorrow can take care of itself. Right now, this is enough. This breath, this stillness, this soft return to who you really are, underneath it all. Sleep well. Let go. You're safe now. And as the breath settles and your body begins to soften into the silence, something else becomes clear. Thoughts haven't fully disappeared. They may be quieter now, but they still come in waves. Some light, some heavy, some quick to vanish, others lingering like smoke. But here's the shift. Instead of fearing them or fighting them, now there's space to listen. Because not every thought is a problem. Not every loop needs to be broken. Some thoughts aren't the cause of pain at all. They're the signal. They're the flare from a deeper fire. And when we misunderstand the signal as the source, we chase shadows. Overthinking doesn't begin in the mind. It begins in the body's response to something unprocessed. A tension not named. A feeling not felt. A memory not met with kindness. The chatter, the spirals, the loops, they rise when there's discomfort we're not ready to hold. So the mind gets busy. It builds scaffolding to protect what hurts. It builds arguments, explanations, predictions, endless what-ifs, hoping one will be the answer. But none of them are, because the root isn't thought. It's pain beneath the thought. It's uncertainty beneath the words. Buddhism teaches that mental activity is like wind on the surface of water. You can try to calm the wind, Or you can go deeper, beneath the waves, where the water is always still. That deeper space is where healing happens. But to reach it, you have to stop treating thoughts like enemies. You have to stop believing every one of them is trying to sabotage you. Some are just symptoms, indicators, emotional red flags waving in the dark. Mental chatter is a language. It says, something inside needs attention. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. It means your system is intelligent enough to create noise when something's unresolved. And instead of silencing the noise with more noise, the Buddhist path invites us to listen differently. The discomfort that comes before overthinking is subtle. It may feel like restlessness, like a quiet ache in the chest, like a vague unease you can't explain. That moment, before the mind starts racing, is gold. That's the moment to notice, to pause. Because the moment you feel that inner twitch and say, "What is this really about?" you interrupt the automatic loop. You become conscious. And consciousness is the first crack in the wall of compulsive thought. This is not about analyzing the discomfort. That's just another trap. The goal isn't to solve your feelings, it's to feel them without explanation. Buddhist meditation calls this direct experience, just sitting with the raw texture of what's arising. No label, no backstory, just presence. That's where transformation begins. Let's say you notice mental chatter picking up late at night. Instead of chasing the thoughts, try asking gently, what came before this? Did something leave me unsettled today? Did I feel unseen, unheard, overwhelmed? What emotion was pushed aside? Often, mental spirals follow emotional suppression. And when you bring awareness to what was buried, the mind no longer needs to overcompensate. There's a phrase in the Satipatthana Sutta, the core Buddhist teaching on mindfulness, that says, one knows the feeling as it arises. Not judges, not explains, just knows. This knowing isn't intellectual, it's somatic, it's embodied. It's the kind of knowing that comes from being still with what is uncomfortable until it begins to soften on its own. When people say, "I can't stop thinking," what they often mean is, "I'm trying to run from a feeling I haven't made peace with." The loop isn't logical, it's emotional. And that's why logical solutions fail. The overthinking continues because the body still feels unsafe. That's where the real healing starts, not by fixing the story, but by creating a sense of safety in the present. So how do you do that? First, drop into the body. Scan it gently. Where is the tension hiding? Not what caused it. Not who caused it, just where is it? Is there tightness in the chest, a heat in the stomach, a pulling behind the eyes? That's where the emotional soil lies, the space where old roots are tangled. And if you sit with it long enough, the chatter begins to slow. Not because you've silenced it, but because you've listened to what it was protecting. This is the radical power of Buddhist awareness. It doesn't force change. It allows understanding. And understanding dissolves the need for defense. There's a Buddhist metaphor that says, thoughts are like raindrops on a pond. They disturb the surface, but the pond itself is never broken. Your awareness is that pond. The chatter is not a flaw, it's just movement on the surface. And when you learn to rest below that surface, the movement no longer defines you. Overthinking often feels endless because it feeds on resistance. Every time you say, "I shouldn't be thinking so much," you feed the very loop you're trying to escape. But when you say, "Let me feel what's underneath this," the loop loses energy. Thought can't thrive without emotional fuel. Sometimes the emotional root is grief, sometimes it's shame, sometimes it's fear of losing control, and these emotions don't disappear when ignored, they just get louder. That loudness, that's the chatter. And once you tend to the emotion, thought no longer needs to scream to get your attention. This is where the practice of metta, loving kindness, can change everything. Not because it makes you positive, but because it teaches you how to meet yourself with gentleness. If the emotional root is shame, then attacking your thoughts only grows that shame. But when you say, "Even this I welcome," the cycle weakens. The chatter softens, because you're no longer feeding it fear. Even doubt, one of the core hindrances in Buddhist teaching, becomes a messenger. Doubt says, "Are we safe? Is it okay to rest? What if we missed something?" But when met with presence, doubt turns into clarity. Because doubt isn't a verdict, it's a doorway. It leads to deeper questions. It points you to what needs to be seen. That's why overthinking is not your enemy. It's your teacher. It says, there's something in you that needs love. And if you listen, not to the words, but to the wound, the mind begins to trust that it doesn't need to keep spinning. Some nights, the thoughts will still come. Some days, the loop will return. That doesn't mean you failed. That means you're alive. The goal is not to become a blank slate. The goal is to build a relationship with your inner world so strong, so compassionate, so grounded, that even when the storm comes, you don't lose your center. And this is why Buddhist practice isn't about suppressing thought. It's about changing your relationship to thought. Thought is not the fire, it's the smoke. If you want to clear the air, you have to find where the fire is burning, and when you meet the fire with stillness, it starts to go out, because nothing can burn forever when it's no longer being fed. This is how healing begins, not by force, not by logic, but by tenderness. The chatter doesn't end because you crushed it. It ends because you stopped abandoning yourself, because you turned toward what you feared most and said, "You're allowed to be here, but you're not allowed to run the show." So as you rest now, as your body lays still and your breath flows in and out, let the mind wander without judgment. Let the thoughts rise without grabbing them. And when discomfort appears, don't run, don't label, don't solve. Just stay, just breathe. And let the mind show you what it's been trying to protect all along. Because once you meet that place with presence, the chatter loses its urgency. The signal has been received, the message delivered, and what's left is not silence, it's peace. You're getting closer now, not to the end of thought, but to the end of fear around it. Thought is no longer the enemy. It's no longer the problem. It's just a ripple on the surface of something much deeper, and that depth is you. Let that awareness hold you as you drift. Let it soften the loops. Let it dissolve the noise. This is not just rest. This is repair. This is the stillness underneath all storms. And you're finally home. And now that you've learned how to sit with the discomfort under mental noise, how to stop fighting thoughts and start feeling what fuels them, another door opens. A quieter one. It leads deeper, past what the mind spins, and into what the heart has stored. Because once the outer noise begins to fade, something else becomes noticeable, not louder, but clearer. A softer voice that was always there, but kept getting buried. The voice of what was never said, never felt, never grieved, never acknowledged. And that voice is the whisper beneath the noise. This whisper doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. It waits. It waits for silence. It waits for stillness. And when we stop reacting to thoughts, when we stop trying to fix or escape our inner world, that whisper begins to rise. And what it says can't be heard in words. It's felt in the body. It might feel like an ache in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes, a lump in the throat. And it often carries the truth we've avoided. In Buddhist practice, there's a quiet teaching that says, not all suffering speaks loudly. Some of it waits in the corners of the mind, softly pulling strings from the shadows. These are not the thoughts we hear first. These are the deeper feelings underneath them, the ones that twist our decisions, shake our sleep, and confuse our clarity, not because they are loud, but because they are unheard. Sometimes it's grief, not always about death. Often it's the grief of lost parts of ourselves, the moments we betrayed our truth, the friendships that faded without closure, the versions of us we had to abandon to survive. Grief that doesn't weep, it lingers. It shows up as hesitation, numbness, chronic fatigue, and over time, the mind builds layers of distraction to avoid feeling it fully. That's how loops begin, not out of nowhere, but out of protection. Other times, it's fear, not the obvious kind, not fear of spiders or the dark, but the fear of being left, the fear of not being enough, the fear of facing what we've denied. That fear speaks in tightness, in tension, in resistance. It's the reason some people can't sit still, the reason silence feels threatening, the reason the mind stays busy even when life is calm. And then there's craving, deep, hidden longing, not for things, but for connection, for safety, for meaning. Craving not just for love, but to be seen without judgment, heard without being fixed, held without needing to prove anything. Craving like a hunger in the soul, constantly mistaken for goals, achievements, or even relationships. And when that craving isn't understood, the mind races to feed it with substitutes. More thinking, more planning, more, if I just do this, I'll feel better. But it doesn't work, because the craving isn't for change, it's for wholeness. This is the whisper beneath the noise, and it's not trying to harm you, it's trying to be felt. Buddhism teaches that all unhealed wounds ask for attention, not because they want to hurt us, but because they want to be released. And the only way to release them is through full, gentle presence, not analysis, not self-critique, just presence. In deep meditation, monks speak of moments where silence becomes so full, so rich, that something old rises, a memory, a feeling, a sudden wave of sadness without context. And in those moments, they don't chase it, they don't push it away, they bow to it. They let it pass through like a storm through an open field. You can do the same, not through effort, but through willingness, through staying. When something painful rises in the silence, you don't need to label it. Just feel where it lives in the body. Is it heaviness in the belly? Is it a coldness in the arms? Let the body tell the story the mind can't. Because sometimes the mind forgets what the body remembers, and healing begins when both are allowed to speak. There's a concept in Buddhism called Vedana, the feeling tone. Every experience has it, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The whisper beneath the noise often lives in the unpleasant tone, not because it's bad, but because it's unprocessed. And when you learn to sit with unpleasantness without running, something opens, something softens. Because most of our suffering isn't in the feeling itself, it's in the reaction to it. The whisper might say, "I'm tired," not just physically, but soul deep. Tired of pretending, tired of controlling, tired of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. That kind of tiredness doesn't go away with sleep. It goes away with truth. The truth that you're allowed to feel everything, even the things that make no sense, even the things that don't look spiritual. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron once said, "The most fundamental thing we can do for the world is to learn to stay. To stay with ourselves, to stay with what hurts. Not to change it, but to be with it. Because healing isn't in the fixing, it's in the intimacy. And intimacy begins when we listen to what's never been allowed to speak. So how do we hear that whisper? We make space. We stop crowding our experience with commentary. We stop turning every feeling into a problem to solve. We stop filling the silence. And in that empty space, the whisper arrives. It may come as tears. It may come as deep sighs. It may come as a memory you thought you forgot. Trust it. Don't judge its timing. Don't rush its message. The heart speaks in sensations, not sentences. The whisper won't always make sense, but it doesn't need to. You're not here to interpret it. You're here to feel it, to hold it like a child who's been waiting outside in the cold, unsure if anyone would come. And once it's held, it quiets. Not because you forced it into silence, but because it no longer needs to scream. When you begin to feel this way, honestly, rawly, you start to notice how unnecessary most overthinking really is. Because the mind only races when it doesn't trust the body to feel. And the moment the body is trusted again, the mind rests. This is why in Buddhist practice, awareness isn't just for the mind, it's for the heart, the whole heart, the broken parts, the hidden parts, the parts that still ache for something they can't name. When you include them, the whisper turns into a song, not loud, but beautiful, and it guides you home. There may be times when the whisper becomes overwhelming, when the grief rushes in, when the fear feels too big. That's when you return to the breath, not to escape, but to anchor. The breath doesn't erase the feeling. It supports you in it. It says, you can feel this and still survive. And if the whisper brings up a truth you've been avoiding about your life, your relationships, your past, that's okay. Let the truth rise without forcing action. Listening doesn't mean you have to fix everything right away. Listening means you let what's real exist without resistance. This is the opposite of how most people live. They fight the whisper. They cover it with noise. They call it weakness. But in truth, it's the core of their wisdom. Because what you avoid holds the key to your freedom. What you push down controls you. What you allow to rise transforms you. Tonight, as your body rests and your breath slows, give permission for what's been quiet to speak. Not with fear, not with shame, with openness, with compassion. This whisper has waited long enough. It doesn't need to be understood. It just needs to be met. Let the voice of your unspoken feelings echo softly through the quiet. Let them rise and fall and rise again, each one bringing you closer to peace. Not the peace of silence, the peace of truth. Because when the whisper is heard, the noise no longer owns you. You're not avoiding, you're not escaping, you're listening, and in that listening, you begin to heal. And once the unheard feelings are finally welcomed, once the whisper beneath the noise is no longer feared, something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. A space appears, not empty, but uncertain. That in-between space where the mind, now quieter, starts to ask its oldest questions, the questions that never got answers, the ones that looped for years, the ones that still whisper, "But why did it happen? What's going to happen next? What does it all mean?" And here lies the next trap. Because when the heart opens, the mind often steps back in, not to sabotage, but to explain, to make sense, to find order where life has been messy. It's not trying to harm you, it's trying to protect you from the discomfort of not knowing. But this is the moment where a deeper teaching begins, because not every question has an answer, and not every question needs one. Buddhism teaches a kind of freedom that doesn't come from figuring things out, but from letting things be unresolved. Not because you don't care, but because peace doesn't depend on mental conclusions. Peace depends on letting go of the need for mental conclusions. This is where overthinking finds its fuel. In the belief that certainty will fix everything, that if the right answer is found, the pain will vanish, that if every loose end is tied up, the mind will rest. But it's a lie, because the mind doesn't want answers, it wants control, and control doesn't end suffering, it creates more of it. Some of the Buddha's most famous moments came not from what he said, but from what he refused to say. When asked about the origin of the universe, the nature of the self after death, or the metaphysical structure of reality, he stayed silent. Not because he didn't know, but because he knew that the search for those answers distracted from the direct experience of freedom. The compulsion to answer every question, he taught, is a form of suffering in disguise. He told the story of a man struck by a poisoned arrow. The man refused to have the arrow removed until he could know who shot it, what tribe they belonged to, what kind of wood the arrow was made from. But by the time those answers came, he would already be dead. That is what obsessive questioning does. It distracts from healing. It pulls attention away from the present and into a maze with no exit. We do this every day. We wonder why someone left. We analyze why life unfolded the way it did. We seek meaning in heartbreaks, in failures, in silence. And the mind promises that the right answer will bring peace. But peace isn't hiding behind an answer. Peace is waiting beneath the question. There's a difference between inquiry and obsession. One is spacious, the other is tight. One explores, the other demands. You can feel the difference in the body. Obsessive questioning feels like a clenched fist. True curiosity feels like an open palm. And the path of Buddhism is to walk with the open palm, not because all questions are answered, but because all questions are allowed. This is not easy. The mind is addicted to closure. It wants the period at the end of every sentence, but real life is often a comma or a dash or no punctuation at all. Things end without resolution. Stories shift without explanation. People change without warning. And the peace we long for comes not from resisting that truth, but from relaxing into it. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to walk through life with questions still echoing in your chest. You are allowed to rest, even if the mystery still lingers. That's not negligence. That's mastery. The kind that trusts life without needing to control it. Some questions are meant to stay open, not as a problem, but as a portal, a doorway into deeper awareness. Because the space left by an unanswered question becomes the space where presence grows. You stop seeking, you start sensing, you stop racing toward meaning, you start settling into truth. The Zen tradition calls this "don't know mind." It's not ignorance, it's not denial, it's the wisdom of staying soft in the face of the unknown, the wisdom of not rushing to conclusions, the wisdom of living fully in the middle of mystery. This is where overthinking dissolves, not through answers, but through surrender. When you stop trying to solve the puzzle, you see the whole picture. And the picture says, this is life. It moves, it breaks, it heals, it leaves things unfinished. And still, it is sacred. You may never know why someone hurt you. You may never know what the future holds. You may never get closure from the people who disappeared. But that doesn't mean you can't be free, because freedom doesn't wait for closure. Freedom appears when you stop needing it. This is where real maturity begins, not in knowing more, but in needing less certainty, in holding space for the unknown without trying to make it known, in letting life be open-ended and still choosing to show up fully. The Buddha taught that clinging to views, rigid beliefs, fixed ideas, intellectual certainty is one of the deepest causes of suffering. Because once the mind believes it knows everything, it stops listening, it stops learning, it stops feeling, and a closed mind is the opposite of a free one. So how do you begin to loosen this grip? Start by noticing which questions you've been trying to answer for years. Which ones keep circling back? Which ones bring tightness, not clarity? Which ones feel like pressure, not peace? Then ask yourself, what if I didn't need an answer? What if this question could stay open? What would it feel like to rest, even with this thread left untied? That's the doorway, the shift from needing to knowing, from grasping to holding lightly, from mental tension to spiritual spaciousness. This isn't about pretending questions don't exist. It's about changing your relationship to them. You begin to see that the question isn't always the problem. It's the attachment to resolving it that creates suffering. And once that attachment loosens, the question becomes lighter. Sometimes it even fades. Not because it's been answered, but because it's no longer charged. This is how Buddhism rewires the thinking mind. It doesn't make you smarter, it makes you softer. It doesn't make you right, it makes you free. Free to live without conclusions, free to love without guarantees, free to rest without closure. And the paradox is that in this freedom, some of the deepest answers begin to emerge, not as thoughts, but as experiences, as clarity that rises when the mind is quiet, as truth that surfaces only when you've stopped chasing it. When you stop forcing life into answers, life becomes more alive. When you stop demanding to know, you begin to see. And what you see is not certainty. It's something better. It's presence. It's grace. It's the quiet strength of someone who has made peace with the unknown. So tonight, as questions rise in your mind, let them come. Let them float like leaves on water. You don't need to pick them up. You don't need to chase them down. You don't need to solve anything. Just breathe. Just rest. Just feel the freedom of not knowing. Because some of the most beautiful truths are the ones that can't be explained, only lived, only felt, only allowed. Let go of the answer. Stay with the question. And in that space, let freedom find you. And now that the grip on certainty has loosened, now that the mind is learning to stay open without rushing to conclusions, something even deeper becomes visible. The mind, although quieter, still tries to be helpful. It still believes its thoughts are necessary, that if it just works a little harder, thinks a little more, analyzes one more angle, something will click. Something will finally make sense. But this is the next illusion we need to face, the belief that more thinking leads to better clarity. This is the illusion of productive thinking. It looks noble, it feels responsible, it even gets rewarded. Society calls it preparation, diligence, problem-solving. But often, what looks like productivity is just anxiety in disguise. The mind spins, not because it's solving, but because it's afraid to stop. Because in stillness, we face ourselves. And that's what most people are truly avoiding, not failure, not uncertainty, but the silence that remains when the mind goes quiet. Buddhist teachings speak clearly on this. Clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from seeing clearly. And seeing clearly is only possible when the water of the mind is still, when it's not agitated by urgency, when it stops forcing outcomes. The modern world has glorified over-analysis. We believe that if we consider every possibility, calculate every outcome, prepare for every scenario, we'll be safe. But instead, we become frozen. We start confusing movement for progress. The mind keeps going and going and going, but it's moving in circles, not forward. In Buddhist psychology, this is known as papanka, the proliferation of thought. It's the snowball effect where one idea leads to another and another, until the original issue is buried under layers of speculation. And the tragedy is that none of it brings relief. In fact, the more complex the thinking becomes, the harder it is to act. We become trapped in the illusion that we're being productive, when in truth, we're just deepening our own confusion. The Buddha warned against this. He taught that the mind cannot be forced into wisdom. Wisdom arises naturally when grasping ceases, when the mind is no longer trying to manipulate reality into a shape that feels safe. Wisdom, in its truest form, is spacious. It leaves room. It breathes. It doesn't demand perfect answers. It recognizes what is true right now. So why does the illusion of productive thinking feel so strong? Because it gives us a temporary sense of control. When we think, we feel like we're doing something. We feel like we're preventing disaster. But what we're actually doing is overloading the system. The nervous system becomes strained. The body tightens. Decisions become harder, not easier. Insight becomes clouded by mental fog. This is where the practice of samatha, calm abiding, comes in. It's not just sitting still, it's learning to recognize when thinking has stopped being helpful and started becoming compulsive. It's the ability to pause, feel the body, and gently return to breath without judging the mind for trying to help. Because the mind is not the enemy, it's just misunderstood. It thinks solving everything will protect you. It doesn't realize that what you need isn't more solutions, it's more space. Many great spiritual teachers, including those outside Buddhism, have pointed to this. That true clarity arises in the gaps between thoughts, not from stacking more on top. That sometimes the best insights come when we stop trying to think and allow ourselves to rest. This is not laziness, it's the wisdom of non-doing, the deep knowing that comes when we trust the present instead of controlling the future. In daily life, this might look like stepping away from a decision instead of thinking it to death. It might mean taking a walk, watching the sky, doing nothing for a few minutes, not as avoidance, but as space-making. When the mind is tense, its answers are narrow. When the mind is relaxed, truth reveals itself. Buddhist monastics often emphasize this kind of clarity. In silence, on long retreats, with no distractions or external input, they find that insight rises without effort. Not because they're chasing it, but because they're still enough to receive it. And this is the subtle truth most of us miss. Real solutions often appear when we stop searching. This doesn't mean thinking is useless. It has its place. Strategic thinking, creative thinking, practical planning, these are valuable tools. But the danger comes when the mind believes it is the only tool. When it forgets that awareness, presence and stillness are just as essential, sometimes more. The illusion of productive thinking is also deeply tied to identity. Many people feel valuable when they're thinking. When they're figuring it out, it becomes a performance, a way to prove worth. But worth isn't proven by exhaustion, and clarity doesn't come from mental overwork. It comes from connection to what is real, here and now. Try noticing the next time your mind feels busy, whether it's actually helping. Is it bringing peace? Is it offering real insight? Or is it replaying the same ideas, the same doubts, the same fears in a loop? The mind can disguise fear as productivity. It can call panic planning. It can label stress focus. But the body knows the truth. And if the body feels tired, if the breath feels shallow, if the heart feels tight, then it's not clarity, it's just noise. And that's where mindfulness becomes your greatest ally. Not as a trend, not as a habit, but as a radical choice to pause. To stop believing that more thinking is always better. To sit with uncertainty without filling it with more thoughts. Sometimes stillness brings an answer faster than thinking ever could. Sometimes walking away brings clarity that analysis couldn't touch. Sometimes just breathing is enough. The mind doesn't believe this, but your experience will prove it if you try. This is not about rejecting the mind, it's about restoring balance. It's about realizing that insight comes through harmony, not force. That mental strain never leads to wisdom, but presence does. And when you start living from presence, everything changes. Decisions become easier, words become clearer, relationships become softer. Not because you thought more, but because you needed less. This is the heart of Buddhist simplicity. Not making life smaller, but making it lighter. Not turning away from responsibility, but learning how to meet it without tension. When the mind lets go of its obsession with control, a different kind of intelligence rises, one that sees with the whole being, not just the head. Tonight, let your thoughts slow, not because you forced them to, but because they've finally been heard. Let your breath deepen, not as a technique, but as a return. Let the body rest, not because it gave up, but because it finally feels safe enough to stop. Productivity has nothing to do with speed, and clarity has nothing to do with pressure. You're not falling behind. You're not failing by stepping back. You're seeing more clearly than ever. Because in the end, what you needed wasn't the next thought. It was the space to finally hear the wisdom that was always there. Let it rise now, not from force, but from stillness. And now that the spell of overthinking disguised as productivity has begun to lose its hold, what remains is something more honest. A quiet realization that much of our suffering doesn't come from what happens, it comes from what we add to what happens. A single moment of pain becomes a whole story. A small mistake becomes a character flaw. One rejection becomes a full-blown identity crisis. And this is where the next teaching waits. An ancient truth that explains why peace often slips away even after the outer problem is gone. Because we're not just experiencing pain, we're firing a second arrow. In Buddhist teachings, the parable of the two arrows is a cornerstone. It's simple, but it changes everything. When life strikes, it hurts. That's the first arrow. It might be physical pain, it might be emotional, it might be the sharp sting of loss or disappointment or failure. That pain is real. It's part of being human. But what happens next is where suffering grows. The mind reacts. It judges. It analyzes. It blames. It creates a story, and then it starts to believe that story. That's the second arrow. And here's the truth. Most people are not suffering from the first arrow. They're suffering from the second one. The second arrow is what keeps you awake at night. It's what turns a mistake into shame. It's what keeps replaying the breakup, the argument, the failure. It's what makes you feel like you have to earn your right to be at peace. But the second arrow isn't inevitable. It's a habit. And like all habits, it can be unlearned. When the first arrow hits, the body responds. There's pain, sadness, maybe fear. But it's clean. It's direct. It moves through you like a wave. The second arrow distorts that. It grabs the moment and stretches it. It tells you what it means about you. It paints the future with fear. It pulls in the past like a storm gathering clouds. And suddenly, you're no longer present. You're lost in the echo chamber of thought. The Buddha didn't say we could avoid the first arrow. He never promised a life without pain. But he did say we could stop the second one. That's the path to freedom, not avoiding life, but meeting it without self-inflicted wounds. So how do we recognize the second arrow in daily life? Start by noticing your language. After pain arises, what do you say to yourself? Do you say, "This hurts," or do you say, "This always happens to me"? Do you say, "I'm sad," or do you say, "I'll never be okay"? Do you say, "That was a hard moment," or do you say, "I'm such a failure"? That shift is the second arrow. It's subtle, but it's sharp, and it keeps you stuck. The second arrow isn't just thought, it's interpretation, it's resistance, It's the belief that pain shouldn't be here. And the moment you resist the pain, it tightens, it grows, it multiplies. But when you allow the pain without the added story, it starts to soften. It begins to move. Pain is part of life. Suffering is what we build around it. Mindfulness gives you the space to see this process in real time. A moment happens. Pain arises. And then, if you're present, you catch the moment the mind tries to add commentary. You see the story forming. You hear the judgment starting. And that's the moment you get to choose. Do I follow this thought, or do I feel what's here without interpretation? This is not about pretending pain doesn't exist. It's not about positive thinking. It's about clean contact with reality. It's about letting pain be pain without making it personal, without turning it into identity, without weaponizing it against yourself. When someone speaks harshly to you, the first arrow is the sting of their words. The second arrow is the thought, "They hate me," or "I always push people away," or "I'm not good enough." When something doesn't go your way, the first arrow is disappointment. The second arrow is the spiral. Nothing ever works out. Or, "I should have done better." Or, "I knew this would happen." The second arrow builds a story around the pain, and the story becomes the prison. There's a line from a modern meditation teacher that says, "Pain is a wave. Suffering is swimming against it." The second arrow is that resistance. It's the inner fight. It's the refusal to let pain move through naturally. And that refusal creates stuckness. It creates chronic stress. It keeps the nervous system in high alert, even when the threat has passed. So how do we stop firing the second arrow? We learn to pause. When something painful happens, stop. Breathe. Feel the body. Let the raw sensation be felt. Notice the impulse to explain it, to fix it, to analyze it. And don't follow that impulse. Stay with the breath instead. Stay with the tightness. Stay with the ache. Stay with the heaviness, without naming it, without blaming it. Just stay. This takes practice. The mind will try to hijack the moment. It will insist that you need to think it through, that you need to figure out why this happened, that you need to understand. But often, the need to understand is just fear in disguise. It's the mind's way of saying, if I can make sense of this, I'll feel better. But understanding doesn't always bring relief. Presence does. Over time, you start to see how much lighter life feels without the second arrow. You feel pain, and then you move on. You feel grief, and then you breathe again. You feel fear, and then you act anyway. The moment passes, because you didn't trap it with a story. There's another beautiful teaching in Buddhism. Whatever has the nature to arise will also pass away. The first arrow arises. It also passes. But the second arrow stays, because we hold on to it, we feed it, we rehearse it, and it becomes part of our identity. Letting go of the second arrow means letting go of that identity. It means you're no longer the victim of your thoughts. You're no longer the person who needs to figure it all out before resting. You're just someone who feels what's true and then lets it go. And the deeper you go into this practice, the more you realize how much of your pain was optional, how many wounds were self-made, not because you're broken, not because you're weak, but because no one taught you this before. No one told you that pain could be simple, that you didn't need to make it complicated, that you didn't need to make it mean something about your worth. Tonight, as you listen, as you soften, start to notice the second arrows in your own life. The small ones, the big ones, the old ones that still linger. And see if you can take a breath and lay them down, not by pushing them away, but by no longer believing them, no longer fueling them, just letting them rest. Because the first arrow will always come. Life will keep being life. But the second arrow, that one is yours to drop. And when you do, what remains isn't emptiness. It's peace. It's space. It's the quiet freedom of someone who no longer adds pain to pain. And that kind of freedom, that's what healing really means. And now that the second arrow has been seen for what it is, not a fact, but an internal reaction, not truth, but habit, the mind begins to breathe again. The stories soften. The mental loops lose some of their urgency. But there's still one more thread underneath it all, one that quietly fuels overthinking even when the outer stories fade. This is the hidden driver that keeps the mental wheels turning. It isn't obvious at first, but once seen, everything begins to shift. It's not just thought, it's craving. Craving disguised as logic. Craving dressed up as preparation. Craving that hides inside obsession and calls itself intelligence. Overthinking at its core is not random. It's not a mental mistake. It's a strategy, a deeply wired way of trying to feel safe in a world that rarely guarantees anything. Beneath every loop, there's something being chased. And, in Buddhism, that chase has a name, tanha, craving. Not just for objects or people, but for certainty, for security, for control. These are not bad desires. They are deeply human, but they're also unsatisfiable. Because life, by its nature, is unpredictable. And trying to outthink uncertainty is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. When the mind obsesses, it's often doing something very specific, rehearsing safety. It's running scenarios to try and predict danger. It's revisiting the past to make sense of pain. It's simulating future conversations or disasters in the hope that, by thinking about it enough, it won't hurt as much when or if it happens. But this is the illusion. The mind thinks it's preparing. What it's really doing is avoiding the present moment where uncertainty lives. Buddhist insight, called prajna, is the wisdom that sees through craving. It's not intellectual knowledge. It's not learned from books. It arises when the mind is clear enough to see the pattern behind its own movements. When you start to notice that your thinking is always reaching towards something it can't quite hold, that's prajna. When you realize that even your most urgent thoughts are just another layer of craving, that's the beginning of freedom. Let's break this down even further. Craving for certainty shows up when the mind cannot sit with not knowing. It tries to answer every possible question. It seeks definite conclusions in situations that are fluid. This craving doesn't accept that people change, that plans fail, that emotions shift. It wants life to be a fixed shape. But life never stays still, so the craving keeps returning, and the thoughts never rest. Craving for safety is even more primal. It often comes from past wounds. It says, if I think through every possible outcome, maybe I won't get hurt again. It's the voice of trauma. The voice of someone who once felt unsafe and decided that hypervigilance was the only way to survive. And while that strategy may have worked once, it now becomes a trap, because no amount of thinking can guarantee safety, and the pursuit of that guarantee only creates more anxiety. Craving for control is perhaps the deepest. It's the belief that if we just do everything right, say the right thing, make the perfect plan, follow every rule, then life will go our way. But this craving creates perfectionism, it creates rigidity, it creates pressure, and when life inevitably doesn't cooperate, it creates blame, usually directed inward. Obsessive thoughts grow from this soil. They spiral not because you're weak, but because the craving underneath them is so strong, it feels unbearable to let go. And yet, letting go is exactly what Buddhist wisdom invites. Not letting go as in ignoring life. Letting go as in seeing that the craving itself is optional, that it is not who you are, that it can be observed, felt, and released. When prajna arises, it brings a clarity that's not cold, but liberating. It shows you the pattern, and in that seeing, the pattern starts to dissolve. You don't have to force it. Just by seeing the craving clearly, you stop feeding it unconsciously. The thoughts might still arise, but they no longer grip you. You no longer believe their urgency. You start to feel a strange calm in not knowing, a strange freedom in surrender. This is not passive, it's powerful. It's what the Buddha meant when he said craving is the root of suffering. Not because desire is bad, but because identification with desire creates tension. The moment you believe, I must have certainty, you're already in conflict with life. But when you see that thought arise and recognize it as craving, not truth, you reclaim your freedom. This is a shift from attachment to observation, from I am this craving to this craving is passing through me. And from that space, you start to respond differently to your own thoughts. Instead of chasing them, you hold them gently. Instead of arguing with them, you breathe through them. Instead of needing answers, you rest in awareness. Overthinking cannot survive this kind of presence. It depends on speed, on urgency, on looping. When you slow down enough to feel what's beneath the thought, the craving becomes visible. And once it's visible, it's no longer running the show. You don't have to fulfill it. You don't have to follow it. You just have to witness it. It may come in waves. You may notice the craving again and again. That's okay. Each time you recognize it, you weaken its hold. Each time you pause instead of react, you create space for wisdom to grow. This is why Buddhist meditation isn't just about relaxation. It's about retraining the mind to see clearly, to break the trance of craving, to find peace not by fixing life, but by releasing the compulsive need to fix. You start to trust something deeper than thought, a quiet knowing that you are already whole, that nothing needs to be controlled in order for you to be safe, that peace is not the result of mental effort, it's what appears when craving subsides, and this trust grows every time you don't react, every time you don't reach for a false sense of certainty, every time you let the craving pass like a cloud instead of building your identity around it. So the next time your mind begins to obsess, pause. Ask yourself gently, what am I trying to hold on to right now? Is it a story, a plan, a fear, a hope? Let the craving reveal itself, and then meet it not with judgment, but with presence, with kindness, with breath. Because craving is not the enemy. It's a teacher. It shows you where you still believe peace must be earned. And when you stop believing that, peace returns. Not because you did something to deserve it, but because it was always waiting underneath the noise. Let yourself feel that now. Let the craving rise without feeding it. Let the thoughts pass without chasing them. Let the mind rest in what it always feared, not knowing, not controlling, not being certain. And watch what happens. The mind begins to settle. The heart begins to soften. The craving begins to dissolve. And in its place, something gentle remains, something steady and clear, not the result of thinking, not the prize of effort, but the quiet gift of seeing through the illusion. That is prajna. That is peace. And that is where you are headed now. And once the craving underneath obsessive thought is seen clearly, not just intellectually, but from the quiet space that's deeper than craving, everything feels a little lighter. The loops begin to slow. The grip begins to loosen. But even with that clarity, something still lingers. Not craving this time, but residue. Residue from years of thinking, analyzing, storing, collecting every moment and every thought like it might be needed later. And this is where another layer of overthinking reveals itself. Not as noise, not as urgency, but as clutter. The mind, like an overpacked room, filled with thoughts that haven't been used in years. There is a kind of mental weight that doesn't come from what's happening now. It comes from everything the mind has kept. Every unresolved story, every unfinished thought, every memory you didn't know what to do with. This is mental hoarding, the habit of keeping thoughts long after they've served their purpose. Not because they're useful, but because letting go of them feels unfamiliar. Buddhist practice looks at this with both honesty and compassion. It doesn't judge the clutter. It understands how it got there. The mind, like a protective caretaker, holds on to thoughts out of fear. Fear that if you forget, you'll be unprepared. Fear that if you let go, something important will be lost. But just like a house packed with things you no longer use, a crowded mind doesn't make you safer. It makes you less able to breathe. Overthinking often hides in this kind of accumulation. It's not always fast-paced or chaotic. Sometimes it's subtle, a low-level hum of mental objects, ideas, memories, judgments, rehearsals, regrets, all sitting in mental corners, gathering dust. And without regular awareness, they pile up. You carry them from year to year, relationship to relationship, moment to moment, until even silence feels loud. Mindfulness becomes the broom, not aggressive, not rushed, just consistent, gentle. It enters the mind and asks a simple question: is this still useful? And if not, can it be released? That's the practice. A slow but powerful clearing of what no longer serves you. Not because those thoughts were wrong, not because those memories didn't matter, but because they've finished their purpose, and the peace you're looking for needs space to move in. Think of how a physical room feels when it's clean, not just organized, but truly open. There's a kind of ease, a quietness in the walls. There's more light, more room to breathe. The mind is the same. When it's clear, it doesn't need to force peace. Peace is already there. But peace can't enter where there's no space. Start noticing what you carry in your mental environment. Old conversations you replay, future events you've mentally rehearsed 100 times, opinions you no longer agree with but haven't questioned in years. These are the mental boxes stacked against the walls of your inner space. And the weight they create isn't just emotional, it's energetic. It slows down presence, it clouds decisions, it hides clarity under piles of what-ifs and what was. Letting go of mental clutter isn't about forgetting. It's about no longer protecting what's already past. It's about no longer keeping thought patterns just because they've been with you for a long time. Some thoughts stay not because they're true, but because they've been repeated. And repetition isn't truth. Repetition is habit. Mindfulness breaks that habit by introducing awareness, by holding each thought gently and asking, "Do I need this now?" Most people don't realize how much of their mental activity is just recycling, reprocessing the same themes, the same worries, the same stories. It's not new thinking, it's hoarded thinking, and that hoarding creates tension. It fills every quiet moment with echoes. Even when you try to rest, something inside stays alert, because the room is still full. This is why deep meditation feels so refreshing. It's not because something magical happens. It's because something unnecessary is finally released. A single session of awareness can be like opening a window in a stuffy room. Suddenly, the air changes. The mind softens. You feel a little more like yourself again, not the self shaped by accumulated thought, but the one that exists beneath it. The deeper teaching here is that thoughts are temporary. They are meant to move. They are not meant to be kept forever. When we start treating thoughts like permanent possessions, we suffer. We try to organize them endlessly. We give them more attention than they need. But thoughts are more like visitors. Some stay for a moment, some for a while, but eventually they all pass, if you let them. Mindfulness teaches you to let them, not by force, not by suppressing, but by observing the whole process. You see a thought arise, you feel its shape, you watch it fade. That alone begins to clean the mind, because the act of observing breaks the pattern of attachment. There's a Zen saying, "Let thoughts come and go, just don't serve them tea." That's the practice. You don't need to invite every mental guest to stay. You don't need to entertain every thought. You can acknowledge it and let it pass. The less you attach, the less residue it leaves, the more space you preserve. Mental hoarding often comes from the fear of not being in control. The mind thinks, if I let this go, what if I need it later? So it stores it. But here's the paradox. Clarity only arrives when you stop clinging. When you trust that the wisdom you need will arise when the moment calls for it, not because you saved it in advance, but because you're present enough to meet it. This is where the analogy of the cluttered room becomes so helpful. When your home is full of items you don't use, it becomes harder to find the ones that matter. The same is true of the mind. When your inner space is crowded with old thoughts, your intuition becomes muffled. Your instincts become harder to hear. The signal is still there, but the noise is louder. Cleaning your mental space isn't about perfection. It's about kindness. It's about giving yourself the room to breathe again. One thought at a time, one story at a time. And it begins by asking, What am I still holding on to that no longer helps me? Maybe it's a belief about who you are. Maybe it's a regret from 5 years ago. Maybe it's a script you rehearse in your head every time you feel anxious. Whatever it is, meet it gently, feel it fully, and if it's time, let it go. This practice never ends. Just like physical spaces need regular cleaning, so does the mind. Life will always bring new thoughts, new experiences, new stories. But with awareness, you don't have to keep everything. You don't have to carry what was never yours to begin with. You don't have to store what can be set down. So tonight, let your thoughts be seen, but not stored. Let them arise, but not accumulate. Let your breath be the broom. Let stillness be the open window. And let yourself rest in a mind that is slowly remembering how to feel spacious again. The peace you seek isn't missing. It's just hidden behind too much noise. Too many saved files. Too many unopened boxes of memory and meaning. Start clearing. Start releasing. Not all at once, but gently, consistently, lovingly. And one day, the room will feel so open, so light, you won't just think clearly. You'll feel free. And now that the clutter of old thoughts has started to clear, now that you've seen how much mental weight was never necessary, how much peace was buried beneath what was being held, something subtle begins to surface. Not loud, not urgent, just a quiet sense that beneath all the activity, all the clearing, all the releasing, there's something still, something steady, something that has always been here, waiting. It isn't another thought, it's what's between them. This is the space that rarely gets noticed, not because it's hidden, but because it's quiet. The space between two thoughts. That tiny pause most people rush past without realizing it's the most powerful part of the mind. Buddhism treats this space with deep reverence, because this is where liberation lives, not in the content of thought, but in the stillness that separates one thought from the next. The mind is trained to notice what's loud, to latch on to what moves, to analyze, compare, label, and judge every thought that comes. But the peace you're seeking is not in the thoughts themselves. It's in the absence of thought. That moment when one thought ends and another has not yet begun. That's the doorway, not to emptiness, but to presence, not to boredom, but to freedom. Most people never pause long enough to feel it. The mind jumps from one sentence to the next, filling every second with more noise. But if you slow down, truly slow down, you can start to notice the gaps, like silence between musical notes, like breath between words. It's there, and it's alive. When you start to pay attention to these spaces, a shift happens. You begin to feel that your awareness is not made of thought. It exists independently. It holds the thoughts, but it is not the thoughts. And the more you rest in that space, the less power the thoughts have. Not because you're pushing them away, but because you're no longer confusing them for who you are. This is the foundation of non-identification. The practice of recognizing that you are not your thoughts, you are the awareness that notices them. And the clearest proof of that is in the space between them. That's where the mind takes its hands off the wheel. That's where consciousness breathes. That's where the tension dissolves. In meditation, teachers will sometimes guide students to rest in the pause, not to extend it artificially, but to notice it as it naturally arises. It might be half a second. It might be longer. But even that small window reveals the nature of awareness. It shows you what thought is made of, movement, and what presence is made of, stillness. This space isn't an escape from life. It's what makes life clear. It's the difference between reacting and responding, between grasping and observing. When you live only in thought, everything feels like pressure. When you learn to rest in the pause, even for a moment, clarity begins to return. Not because you figured anything out, but because you stepped out of the way. Thoughts are like waves on the ocean. The space between them is the ocean itself. Wide, deep, still. When you notice that space, you're not lost at sea. You've found the shore. And from that shore, everything becomes simpler, more spacious. Even the most difficult thoughts lose their bite, because they're no longer crowding each other. They rise, and then they fall. And in between, there is silence. But this silence is not emptiness. It is full of presence. It is the part of the mind that doesn't argue, doesn't struggle, doesn't compare. It simply sees. And that seeing is powerful, because it breaks the trance of constant thinking. It reminds you that awareness doesn't need to do anything to be complete. It already is. The more time you spend noticing these pauses, the more natural they become. You begin to trust them, to rest in them. Even during the day, in conversation, in work, in movement, you start to feel the spaces between words, between moments, between actions. And you realize that peace doesn't come from slowing life down. It comes from noticing the stillness that was always woven through it. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of liberation. Not some dramatic awakening, not an escape from the world, but a return to the space that has always been free. The space before thought, between thoughts, beneath thought. That's where suffering cannot survive, because suffering is built on stories, and in the space between stories, there is nothing but presence. You might feel afraid to rest there at first. The mind will say it's boring, or meaningless, or that you're wasting time, but that's only because the mind fears what it can't control, and it can't control the space between thoughts, because it doesn't live there. Awareness does. When you rest in that space, you're not dull, you're not passive, you're awake in the deepest way. You're connected to the source of your own consciousness, not filtered through identity, belief, or memory. Just pure seeing, and that seeing is enough. You don't have to try to hold on to that space. You don't have to force the pause to stay longer. That only brings more thought. What you can do is become familiar with it. Trust it. Visit it more often. Each visit leaves a trace, and over time, the path to that stillness becomes easier to find. This is not about perfecting silence. It's about remembering it. Not as a technique, but as your natural state. Underneath all the movement, the noise, the thinking, there is this breath, this pause, this moment where thought falls away and awareness remains. And this is the real teaching. You don't have to silence your thoughts to find peace. You just have to see the silence that was always underneath them. And when you do, even your thoughts become less threatening. Because they are no longer happening to you, they are simply passing through. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to slow, start noticing what lies between them. Don't reach for it. Don't analyze it. Just Rest there, in the space that asks for nothing, in the stillness that doesn't need to be earned. Thought will come again. That's okay. Let it. But also let it go. And in that letting go, feel what remains. Not a void, not emptiness, but presence, pure, quiet, free. The space between two thoughts is not a gap, it's a doorway. And now, you've stepped through. And now that the stillness between thoughts has begun to reveal itself, not as absence, but as the most natural home of awareness, something else begins to show. Something more elusive, but just as real. Because even after touching that silence, thoughts return. They always return. But now they look familiar, recycled, repackaged, wearing different masks, but carrying the same emotional tone. It becomes clear that thoughts don't just disappear, they reincarnate. And this cycle, this repetition, is not random. It's samsara of the mind. In Buddhist teachings, samsara is the cycle of birth and death, the endless loop of suffering that continues when craving and ignorance are left unchecked. But samsara is not just about lifetimes. It's happening right now, inside the mind. Each time a thought arises, plays out, fades, and returns in a different form, samsara continues. Not because the world forces it to, but because the mind, left on autopilot, keeps looping through the same patterns. These thought patterns are like echoes. They return because they haven't been fully seen, because they still carry a charge, because something in us is still reacting to them. They may show up as worry today, regret tomorrow, and a self-critical story the next. But if you look closely, the emotional flavor is the same. That's the karmic echo, not mystical, but psychological. The mind keeps responding in the same way, and the same experiences get recreated. This cycle is not punishment, it's momentum. Mental habits build grooves. The more you follow a pattern of thought, the deeper the groove becomes, and soon the mind starts running through those grooves automatically, not because it's wise, but because it's practiced. That's why the same thoughts keep coming back, even after you've dealt with them. It's not that the mind is broken, it's that the pattern hasn't been fully seen with awareness. Not just recognized, but experienced with clarity. Thought reincarnates itself because we keep reacting the same way. When reaction ends, the cycle begins to break. This is where mindfulness becomes your liberation tool. When you bring presence to a familiar thought, noticing how it feels in the body, how it triggers emotion, how it loops, you start to interrupt the karma. You start to respond instead of react. You stop feeding the momentum, and slowly the thought pattern begins to lose energy. This doesn't happen by force. It happens by insight. Buddhist insight, or vipassana, is not about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It's about seeing thoughts as they are, without clinging or resistance. It's about feeling the entire life cycle of a thought without adding extra weight to it. For example, a thought like, "I'm not good enough," might appear. If you meet it with more thought, arguing with it, defending yourself, trying to disprove it, you've just created a new version of the same cycle. But if you meet that thought with stillness, with full awareness of how it lands in the body, with curiosity instead of defense, something changes. The thought runs its course. It rises, it passes, and the space between thoughts returns. Most people think they're stuck because their thoughts are too powerful, but in truth, they're stuck because they keep reacting in the same way. The moment a thought appears, they follow it, engage with it, rehearse it. That's what keeps it alive. But if you let it pass, really let it pass, without adding fuel, it begins to lose form. This is not suppression. It's transformation. You're not ignoring the thought. You're not pushing it down. You're meeting it without giving it your identity, without calling it mine. That's the key. The more personal the thought feels, the more power it has. But the more you see it as just another mental event, one of thousands, the less control it has over your state of being. Thoughts that reincarnate often carry the same emotional wound: a fear of abandonment, a fear of failure, a craving for approval. That's why they keep returning. Because the original energy hasn't been held with enough compassion to release. It's not enough to silence the mind. The deeper work is to see what's underneath the repetition and meet it with care. Meditative awareness makes this possible. When you sit in silence and allow thoughts to rise and fall without attachment, you begin to recognize the architecture of your own mind. You see the hidden structures, the recurring themes, the emotional fingerprints left on thoughts that seem different but are fundamentally the same. And when that recognition deepens, the spell breaks. Samsara of the mind is fueled by forgetfulness, forgetfulness of the present, forgetfulness of awareness. But the moment you remember, truly remember, that you are not your thoughts, the loop slows. You become less reactive, more grounded, more capable of witnessing a thought without becoming it. This kind of freedom doesn't look dramatic. It's quiet. It's felt in the pause where you used to spiral. It's felt in the space where you now choose breath instead of narrative. It's felt in the gentle smile that comes when an old thought returns and you realize it no longer holds power. Thoughts will still arise. That's the nature of the mind. But they no longer stick. They no longer reincarnate as anxiety, shame, or panic. They appear and then they dissolve. Because you're not feeding them. You're not building new identities out of old fears. You're not using the mind to solve what only presence can soften. There's a teaching in Buddhism that says, what you cling to, you become. And this includes thoughts. When you cling to certain thoughts, whether they're self-critical or self-important, you shape your inner world around them. But when you release the grip, what remains is something much lighter, something more true. The awareness that sees all thought, but is bound by none. And this awareness doesn't need to fix anything. It just needs to see clearly, over and over. Each time a thought pattern rises, there is a choice. Repeat the cycle or recognize it. And with each recognition, samsara begins to unwind. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped believing it was all there was. You might notice familiar thoughts still trying to pull you in. That's okay. That's expected. But you don't have to react the way you used to. You can pause, breathe, feel the body. Watch the thought move through like weather. No longer an identity, just a cloud, just a ripple, just energy. This is what breaks the reincarnation of thought, not resistance, but awareness, not analysis, but spaciousness. When you allow the thought to live and die without building a new version of it, the pattern fades, slowly, then suddenly, and the mind begins to feel new, not because it stopped thinking, but because it stopped clinging. Tonight, let the thoughts come without attachment. Let the mind reveal its old shapes. And instead of reacting, just notice, just stay, just breathe. This is the undoing of samsara, not with effort, but with presence. Not by fighting the pattern, but by seeing that you were never the pattern to begin with. And now the cycle starts to end. Thought rises, thought fades. You remain free. And now that the reincarnating loops of thought have been brought into the light, not with judgment, but with clarity, it becomes easier to feel something else beneath them, something less mental, more physical. As the mind begins to let go of its grip, what's been quietly held in the body starts to show itself, not as new thoughts, but as sensations, tightness in the jaw, pressure behind the eyes, a subtle clenching in the belly. This is the moment to understand that the mind never suffers alone. Every mental storm has a physical echo, and that echo, unless felt, becomes its own source of tension. There is a bridge between the mind and body that few people ever cross. They think of thoughts as one thing and the body as another, but Buddhist practice says otherwise. It shows that mental overactivity and physical contraction move together like two ends of a single rope. When one tightens, so does the other. When one releases, the other softens too. And that's why understanding this connection isn't just useful, it's essential. Because the loops that the mind runs often survive because the body stays clenched. And when the body is ignored, the thoughts don't fade. They fester. Overthinking rarely happens in a relaxed body. It happens when the shoulders creep up without being noticed, when the breath shortens, when the hands fidget, when the legs feel restless. These are not just side effects. They are signals. The body is trying to say, there's too much holding, too much effort. But most people don't listen. They stay in their heads, trying to think their way out of thinking, and the loop continues. Buddhism invites something radically different, awareness of the whole system. It invites presence, not just in the breath or the mind, but in the muscles, the bones, the heartbeat. It teaches that if you want to untangle obsessive thoughts, you need to look at what the body is holding on to. Because sometimes it's not the thought that keeps returning. It's the tension the thought left behind. Physical tension often becomes the new baseline. People live with tight jaws, locked hips, frozen shoulders, and don't even notice. But these areas become storage units for unresolved mental pressure. Every time a thought arises that feels threatening, something uncertain, unfinished, unwanted, the body reacts. It prepares, it braces, and over time, it forgets how to let go. The Buddha often spoke about sati, mindfulness, not just as awareness of thought, but awareness of body. Because without including the body, the practice stays incomplete. And in this teaching, embodiment becomes the medicine. It becomes the access point to healing spirals that thought alone can't reach. You begin by scanning the body gently, not as an exercise, but as a listening. You feel into the chest, the neck, the stomach. You don't try to change anything. You don't force relaxation. You simply notice what's already there. And what's already there is often a map of your stress, a quiet outline of where the mind has been working over time. When this awareness deepens, you start to see patterns. Certain thoughts always bring a clenched jaw. Certain memories tighten the shoulders. Certain worries contract the gut. And instead of trying to change the thoughts, you begin working with the sensation. You soften the jaw. You lengthen the breath. You rest the hands. And slowly, the thought begins to lose momentum. This is the two-way bridge. The mind affects the body. The body affects the mind. And if one side can't let go, the other can't either. This is why relaxation isn't a luxury. It's a requirement. Not just physical rest, but deep, intentional release of tension that the body has been carrying for too long. Even subtle changes can shift everything. Letting the shoulders drop while exhaling slowly. Releasing the belly instead of holding it tight. Feeling the weight of the legs fully supported by the floor. These moments don't seem like much, but they interrupt the loop. They remind the nervous system that it doesn't have to be on guard, that it's safe now, that thinking can slow because the body is no longer reacting. This is not about controlling the body, it's about coming home to it. Many people live above the neck, completely disconnected from what's happening below. But Buddhist embodiment practice teaches full presence. It teaches you to live in your body with the same attention you give your thoughts. Noticing the temperature of your skin, the heaviness or lightness of your limbs, the rhythm of your heartbeat. These are not distractions, they are anchors, and they bring the mind back to now. There is a concept in somatic mindfulness called interoception, the ability to feel what's happening inside the body. When this sense is developed, the entire experience of thought changes. Because now, each thought has a physical fingerprint. You begin to notice, when I think this way, my body does this. And instead of trying to wrestle with the mind, you work with the body. You calm the system from the inside. Even the breath, the most basic bodily function, becomes a guide. Shallow, rapid breathing usually signals mental agitation. But when the breath deepens, not by force, but by awareness, the mind starts to follow. There's a reason the Buddha returned to the breath again and again. It's not just spiritual, it's biological. The breath is the thread that connects mind and body. And every time you follow it fully, you cross the bridge. You bring both sides into harmony. This is where true release begins, not by analyzing your way out of stress, but by softening into it. By giving the body permission to relax, the mind begins to mirror that softness, not immediately, but reliably. Over time, you train both systems to work together instead of against each other. Some thoughts may never need to be solved. They only need to be felt in the body and allowed to pass. And this can only happen when the body is included in the practice. Otherwise, awareness stays too thin, too narrow, and the spiral continues. You might notice during this exploration that certain areas of the body feel numb, or heavy, or overactive. That's okay. That's the map reawakening. Let it speak. Let it unfold without trying to fix it. Awareness alone begins to change the way energy moves. The more space you give the body to be felt, the more room the mind has to let go. Even emotions, often seen as mental experiences, live in the body. Sadness has a texture, anger has a heat, fear has a contraction. And when you meet these not as problems, but as patterns of sensation, they start to dissolve. They stop feeding thought. And thought no longer fueled by emotion, begins to quiet on its own. This is why embodiment is not separate from mindfulness. It is mindfulness. It is what grounds your awareness in reality instead of imagination. It is what turns meditation from a thinking exercise into a full-body experience of presence. Tonight, as you breathe, let your attention widen. Feel into the neck, the back, the stomach. Let yourself notice where tension lives, not to fix it, just to know it, just to say, I see you. And in that seeing, something softens, something lets go. You don't have to do anything dramatic. Just let awareness reach the parts of you that thinking left behind. Let the body speak in its own language. Let the breath move where tightness has been hiding. Let the nervous system reset without being forced, because every time you release tension, you interrupt the mental loop. Every time you come back to sensation, you come back to now. And in that now, thought loses its urgency. It becomes quieter, softer, less demanding. The mind and body are not separate. They're a single experience, moving together. And when one heals, the other follows. So tonight, as you rest, let them walk across the bridge toward each other. Let the breath be the path. Let presence be the meeting point. Let tension unravel not as a task, but as a gift. And in that gift, you return to wholeness. You return to peace. You return to yourself. And now that the tension stored in the body has started to melt under the warmth of full attention, now that the bridge between thought and sensation has begun to open, a different kind of awareness starts to surface. It isn't located in the body, it isn't made of emotion, it's made of language. The quiet but constant voice that explains, comments, and evaluates everything, the inner narrator. It's always there, even when the body is still, and it doesn't speak with breath or heartbeat, it speaks with identity. This voice is often mistaken for truth. It says, "This is who I am," and we believe it. It says, "This is what's happening," and we don't question it. It narrates every moment like a movie, casting you as the main character in a personal story that must always be explained, justified, controlled. And though this voice sounds like intelligence, it is not awareness. It is habit. It is the conditioned self giving running commentary on every thought, feeling, and experience, not to bring clarity, but to maintain its illusion of control. This narrator was not born with you. It was built over years, out of memories, labels, fears, and social expectations. Its job is not to observe life, but to script it. It keeps the ego alive by keeping a story running. Even when silence is present, it wants to fill it. Even when there is nothing to solve, it starts solving anyway. That's why it doesn't stop. Because stopping would mean facing what exists beyond the story. And that, for the narrator, is terrifying. In Buddhist thought, this voice is part of the false self, the one made of mental formations. It isn't you, it's the accumulation of conditioned identity, held together by the glue of narration. The more you identify with this voice, the more trapped you feel in its rhythm. The voice judges, it compares, it replays conversations, it imagines future disasters, and it disguises itself as you. So, you rarely notice how automatic it is. The first step is not to silence it. The first step is to see it, to hear it without being pulled into it. To realize that it's speaking, but that you don't have to answer. The voice might say, "You should be doing more," but you don't have to move. It might say, "You always mess things up," but you don't have to believe it. You are not the voice. You are the awareness that hears it. When this shift happens, a new kind of silence appears. Not because the narrator is gone, but because it's no longer being followed. The voice becomes background noise, and the foreground becomes quiet, spacious, free. This doesn't mean the narrator won't fight back. It will. It's built to survive. It will get louder before it gets quieter. It will insist that its stories are urgent, that without it, everything will fall apart. But if you stay still, if you just keep listening without reacting, the power begins to fade. You might hear it say, "This silence is uncomfortable. Do something." You might hear it say, "You're wasting time." You might hear it scramble to name what you're feeling. That's how it stays alive, by defining everything. But not everything needs a label. Not every feeling needs a story. Some things are meant to be felt, not narrated. This is where meditation becomes medicine, not because it stops thoughts, but because it shows you how much of the inner voice is repetition. It says the same things, over and over, with different words maybe, but the same message. You're not safe. You're not enough. You need to fix this. But those messages are just echoes. They're not updates from reality. They're recycled lines from an old script. And once you see the script, you stop acting in it. There is a freedom that comes not from changing the inner voice, but from realizing you don't have to listen. You can hear it without feeding it, without answering it, without turning it into action. And the more you do that, the more space you create inside. Space that doesn't need to be explained. Space that just is. Buddhist teachings refer to this as returning to your original mind. The mind before thought, before story, before narrator. It's not blank. It's clear. It sees without describing. It knows without defining. It experiences without needing to explain. That mind is always here, underneath the voice, waiting to be remembered. This practice is not passive. It's fierce in its gentleness, because to stop following the inner narrator means to stop performing for it, to stop living a life that needs constant explanation, to let go of the identity that was built out of commentary and fall back into the simple truth of being. This means letting go of the need to justify your feelings, to narrate your healing, to prove your worth with inner monologue. It means learning how to sit in the moment without narrating it back to yourself in real time. And when the voice speaks, it means smiling at it, not as an enemy, but as an old habit that no longer needs to run your life. You don't need to kill the narrator. You just need to stop hiring it to tell your story. The less you rely on it, the more natural silence becomes. And in that silence, something else starts to rise. Not a new voice, a new way of knowing, direct, wordless, peaceful. This is what Buddhist insight points toward again and again. Not more thinking, but clearer seeing. Not louder inner dialogue, but deeper inner stillness. The narrator says, "You are this story." Awareness says, "You are what sees the story." And once you see that clearly, you no longer confuse the voice for yourself. This changes everything. Decisions feel less pressured. Emotions feel less tangled. Relationships become more real, because you're no longer experiencing them through commentary. You're present, fully, without needing to explain why. And this is where the real silence begins, not the silence of no sound, the silence of no self-narration. The moment when you stop describing your life to yourself and just live it, moment to moment, breath to breath, without the middleman. Tonight, let the inner voice keep speaking if it must, but don't follow, don't agree, don't resist. Just let it speak into open space, like a radio left on in the corner. You hear it, but you don't engage. And slowly, it becomes background, then quieter, then irrelevant. You are not that voice. You never were. You are the space it echoes in. You are the awareness that remains long after it fades. And in that awareness, there is nothing to prove, nothing to fix, nothing to narrate. Only peace, only presence, only what is real. And now that the inner narrator has been gently exposed for what it is, not a truth-teller, but a habit of identity trying to hold on to itself, you might begin to notice just how deeply that voice had woven itself into your everyday moments. The constant background commentary may quiet, but the habit of grasping for something to think about still lingers. Even without the judgment, the mind can still reach, still loop, still spin in silence. This is where one of the oldest and simplest teachings in Buddhism becomes not just helpful, but essential. The breath. Not as a trick, not as a relaxation technique, as an antidote to looping thought. A thread back to presence when the mind forgets how to stop chasing itself. It's easy to dismiss the breath, to assume it's just a tool for beginners, something soft and surface level. But in Buddhist practice, the breath is sacred. It's not just air. It's awareness in motion. It's the one process in the body that is both automatic and voluntary, always happening, yet always available to be observed. That makes it the perfect anchor for a mind that's addicted to movement. A looped mind chases. A grounded breath interrupts that chase. Thought loops feed on tension, on unresolved emotion, on identification, and most of all, on inattention. The mind slips into automatic mode and starts chewing on the same story over and over, not because it loves that story, but because it has nowhere else to go. There's no ground beneath it, but the breath is ground. It is here. It cannot exist in the past or future. It happens now. And by returning to it, the mind is given something it desperately needs: contact with the present. This isn't about controlling the breath. That only tightens the loop. This is about feeling the breath without managing it, following it like a traveler being guided home, feeling its texture, its temperature, its rhythm, the way it enters the body and leaves on its own. You begin to notice that you're not breathing the breath, it's breathing you, and that shift changes everything. A thought loop is like a record stuck in a groove. It plays the same note until something gently nudges the needle. That nudge doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be real. The breath is that nudge. Not by overpowering the mind, but by outlasting it, by offering something simpler, something true. There is something deeply soothing about the breath when it's truly felt, not noticed for a second and then abandoned, but felt in every part of the inhale and every part of the exhale, because within each cycle is a complete meditation. The breath rises, the breath falls. It is born, it dies, it begins again. This is the mirror of life itself, and when the mind tunes into that pattern, it starts to match the rhythm. Thought becomes less urgent, less repetitive, less sharp. This is not a distraction, it's not an escape. It's a return, a soft remembering of what presence feels like without needing thought to define it. And when the mind starts spinning again, you don't need to resist. You don't need to analyze. You just come back to the breath, again and again and again. Buddhist masters have long said that if you can stay with a single breath, just one breath, from beginning to end, without interruption, you will touch reality as it truly is. That may sound simple, but it's radical, because most minds have never fully followed a breath in their entire lives. They've noticed it, measured it, maybe tried to deepen it, but they haven't merged with it, haven't dissolved into it, haven't let the breath be the teacher. And that's exactly what it is, a teacher. The breath doesn't try to fix your thoughts. It doesn't argue with them. It just keeps going, calm, steady, present. No matter what the mind says, the breath keeps breathing. No matter how loud the loop becomes, the breath moves silently beneath it. And when awareness joins that breath, the loop no longer has the same grip. It's not that thought stops. It's that it becomes transparent. It loses weight. You see it rise. You see it fall, just like the breath. And that mirroring teaches the mind that it doesn't have to hold on, that it doesn't have to figure everything out, that it can let go, just like the breath does. Every exhale is a small release. Not metaphorically, physically. When the body exhales, the nervous system shifts. The heart slows. The tension drops. It's an invitation the mind rarely accepts because it's too busy. But when it does, something changes. The loop doesn't end with a bang. It fades. It dissolves into the silence that was always there. Following the breath doesn't mean closing your eyes and disappearing. It means opening your awareness and arriving. Noticing how each inhale fills you. Noticing how each exhale empties you. And resting in that cycle, not as a practice, but as a homecoming. As a reunion with the part of you that doesn't need to think in order to be whole. The breath also teaches impermanence. You can't hold it. You can't keep it. You can't store it up. It comes and it goes. And that truth, when felt directly, starts to unwind the illusion that any thought can give lasting safety. Thought pretends to offer security. Breath teaches that real security comes from accepting flow, from being okay with not holding on. This doesn't require perfection. You'll drift. You'll forget. That's not failure. That's part of the rhythm. The moment you notice you've drifted and gently return to the breath, you are practicing liberation. Every return is a small act of freedom. Every return breaks the illusion that thought is all there is. And slowly, the relationship to the mind begins to change. It stops being the center of your experience. It becomes background, like weather, sometimes cloudy, sometimes clear, but always passing. Meanwhile, the breath stays steady, like the earth beneath your feet, like the tide that never forgets to rise and fall. When the mind loops, it's trying to protect you. But protection, rooted in fear, becomes a prison. The breath shows you another way. It protects by grounding, by steadying, by reminding you that this moment is safe enough to stop running, safe enough to feel, safe enough to rest. Let this be your practice, not to think less, but to follow more. Follow the breath, not to escape the mind, but to remember what's real, what's alive, what doesn't need a story to exist. Let the breath be your doorway back, not to some ideal version of peace, but to the peace that's already here. Tonight, follow it, not in your head, in your body. Follow it like a thread that pulls you back into yourself. Let the thoughts loop if they must, but let your awareness return to the breath. Again, and again, and again, until the loops lose their energy, until the silence feels fuller than the stories, until presence is no longer a concept, but a place. And once you're there, stay, breathe, be. And now that the breath has opened a doorway back to stillness, not by force, but by rhythm, you begin to feel a deeper truth rising beneath the surface. Even as the thoughts quiet down and the mind begins to slow, there's still something inside that reaches. It reaches not for a thought, not for an escape, but for an answer, a conclusion, a guarantee, a solid ground to stand on. This reaching isn't noise. It's not loud like overthinking. It's quieter, but just as persistent. It's the craving to know, and not just to know facts, but to know outcomes, reasons, meanings, futures. This is the root that often hides behind the spiral of thought, the fear of uncertainty. In Buddhism, this craving for certainty is seen clearly. It's a form of attachment, not to things, but to knowing. And what most people don't realize is that the desire to understand everything is often what keeps the mind spinning. Not because understanding is wrong, but because the attachment to understanding turns the mind into a prisoner of its own questions. The world trains people to believe that knowing is safety, that if you just know enough, plan enough, learn enough, think enough, you can prevent suffering. But reality doesn't work that way. Things still fall apart. People still leave. Feelings still shift. Life still moves in unexpected ways. And when the mind refuses to accept this, it begins to overthink, not to process, but to protect. This need to know becomes its own burden. You start replaying conversations not because you enjoy them, but because you're trying to decode them. You analyze future scenarios not because you can change them, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. The loop isn't fueled by thought itself, it's fueled by resistance to the unknown. Buddhist wisdom doesn't ask you to reject knowledge. It asks you to release your dependency on it. It teaches that the deepest peace doesn't come from what is known. It comes from the ability to be with what is unknown, to rest in a space where answers haven't yet arrived and may never come, and to not feel threatened by that. The Buddha himself refused to answer certain metaphysical questions, not because he didn't have insight, but because he knew those questions were rooted in the craving for control. And craving, no matter what form it takes, leads to suffering. So instead of offering answers that soothe the surface, he offered a path that dissolves the need for answers altogether. That path begins with presence. Presence is not just awareness of what's happening, it's awareness without needing to name it. It's a tension that doesn't demand clarity. Most people mistake peace for understanding. They think, once I figure this out, I'll be free. But freedom doesn't wait at the end of a solved problem. It's available right now when you stop demanding that the problem be solved. This shift changes everything. You start to see that your questions are not the issue. It's your urgency for answers that keeps you from peace. You don't need to resolve the past. You don't need to predict the future. You need to sit in the space in between, where truth isn't a conclusion, but a presence. There is a kind of courage required to stop trying to know everything. It's the courage to let go of the safety blanket of analysis, to stop pretending that if you just think hard enough, life will become predictable. Buddhism calls this courage wise not knowing, not ignorance, not confusion, but a deep, calm acceptance that life doesn't owe you certainty. And in that acceptance, overthinking begins to fade. Not because you stopped thinking, but because you stopped expecting your thinking to fix what only presence can hold. Thoughts will still arise. Doubts will still whisper, but they no longer carry the same weight. You start to feel the difference between a question that arises naturally and a question born from fear. The first is a doorway to insight. The second is a wall built against discomfort. When you stop feeding the need to know, something beautiful happens. Curiosity returns. Not the anxious curiosity that demands answers, but the open curiosity that explores without clinging. You become a witness to life, not a controller of it. And that witnessing allows wisdom to emerge on its own, in its own time. There is a teaching that says, the clear mind does not seek to clarify. It means that clarity is not a product of effort. It's a natural state that arises when effort drops. When the clouds of craving lift, the sky of understanding is already there. You don't need to create peace. You need to stop covering it with questions you were never meant to answer. This is especially important in moments of emotional confusion. When grief comes, when change hits, when someone says something that leaves you unsure, the mind rushes in to interpret, to find meaning, to build a story. But often, that story isn't healing. It's just distraction. The real healing begins when you can feel the emotion fully without needing to name it. When you can say, I don't know what this means yet, and that's okay. Even in relationships, the cost of certainty shows up. You want to know what someone feels. You want to define what's happening. You want to label the connection, the distance, the silence. But some things don't fit into words. Some experiences are meant to be lived, not dissected. When you drop the need to define them, you finally get to feel them. Overthinking thrives on the illusion that knowledge is control. But control is just another story. A way the ego tries to protect itself from the rawness of change. When you stop needing control, you stop clinging to thought. You stop building fortresses out of logic. You stop mistaking certainty for safety. And this is the deeper teaching. Peace doesn't come from knowing. It comes from intimacy with the unknown, from staying open when the mind wants to close, from staying soft when the ego wants to harden, from trusting that life will unfold even when your understanding lags behind. This isn't passive. It's powerful. It's what allows you to live fully without needing a script, to love without needing guarantees, to feel without needing proof, to be without needing to become. Tonight, let yourself rest in the unknown. Let yourself not need answers. Let your breath anchor you when questions rise. Let your body hold space when the mind doesn't know what to do. Let silence be enough, not because you gave up, but because you finally stopped searching for what was never missing. Peace is not the result of solving everything. Peace is what's left when the solving stops. When you realize the mind can rest, even in uncertainty. When you remember that being present is enough. That's the gift of letting go of knowing. That's the release of overthinking. That's the beginning of freedom. And now that the need for certainty has been exposed for what it is, not safety, but a habit of control, you may feel a strange quietness start to settle. A sense of space where questions used to live. At first, this space might feel empty, uncomfortable, but underneath it, something more honest begins to surface. A different kind of knowing, one that doesn't chase answers or build stories, one that rests. This is where the real journey begins, not into clarity through solving, but into clarity through surrender, into what Zen calls don't know mind, a state that doesn't fear the unknown, but allows it to be sacred. Don't know mind is not confusion. It's not indecision. It's not giving up. It's the opposite. It's a deep willingness to stand in the middle of life without needing to shrink it into a narrative. It's the mind that doesn't grasp, that doesn't rush, that doesn't spin its wheels to escape discomfort. This mind is soft, spacious, receptive, and it is in that receptivity that true wisdom begins to bloom. Overthinking, by contrast, is the result of a mind that's forgotten how to rest. It's always scanning, searching, solving, fearing. It treats uncertainty like an emergency, but not knowing isn't the threat the mind believes it to be. In fact, not knowing is the birthplace of peace. Because in that space where the mind surrenders its effort, something deeper comes alive. When you rest in not knowing, you're not lost. You're just no longer pretending that certainty is possible. You're no longer grasping at the future like a drowning person grabs at driftwood. You're letting the ocean hold you. You're floating, not because you figured it out, but because you stopped resisting the water. Zen masters speak of beginner's mind, a mind that sees without assumption. That doesn't pretend to understand everything it meets, that doesn't use past experience as a filter for present truth. This kind of mind can sit with questions. It can sit with silence. It can sit with contradiction, because it doesn't need to wrap life in a tidy conclusion. And this sitting with the unknown, with the open-ended, with the unresolved, is not passive. It's radical, because the mind will try everything to avoid it. It will bring up urgency, anxiety, doubt. It will say, you have to decide, or you must know by now, or what if you're wrong? These voices are not evidence of danger. They are evidence of habit, the habit of fearing the unknown. But fear loses its grip the moment you stop treating not knowing as failure. The moment you see that it is not the end of the path, it is the doorway. The place where something more spacious than thought begins to emerge, where insight arises not through effort, but through openness. This openness isn't blank, it's alive. You begin to notice subtleties, the way your body softens when you stop forcing a decision, the way your breath deepens when you stop rehearsing conversations, the way your heart feels clearer when you stop labeling your feelings. These are not signs of indecision. These are signs of wisdom taking root. Don't know mind is not empty of meaning. It is full of potential. Because when you're no longer rushing toward a conclusion, you become available to the fullness of the moment. You hear more, see more, feel more. And from that fullness, clarity emerges naturally, not as something you grabbed, but as something that unfolded on its own. In Buddhist practice, this is called direct seeing. It's what happens when the mind gets out of the way, when concepts fall away, and what's left is raw awareness. That awareness doesn't need to know everything to respond wisely. It doesn't need a map to take the next step. It simply moves with what is, responds to what's true now. That's enough. This is where the deepest trust is born. Not trust in the future, not trust in a plan, trust in awareness itself, trust in your capacity to be with what's real, even when it doesn't offer closure. That kind of trust dissolves overthinking, not because all questions are answered, but because the urgency to answer them fades. You begin to see that rest doesn't come after everything is figured out. Rest comes when you stop demanding that everything makes sense. When you let life be unclear and still show up with your whole heart. When you stop living as a detective and start living as a witness. And in that witnessing, wisdom unfolds. It speaks not through the mind's logic, but through presence, through intuition, through subtle shifts that can only be felt when you're not rushing past them. This doesn't mean you stop learning, or that you stop reflecting. It means you stop mistaking analysis for peace. You stop mistaking mental effort for clarity. You stop mistaking control for safety. The truth is, the most important things in life can't be fully known in advance. Love, loss, change, meaning. These things must be lived into, felt, allowed. They're not puzzles to solve, they're mysteries to experience. Don't know. Mind allows you to live them more fully because it frees you from the pressure of getting it right, of being certain, of knowing in advance what you can only know by being present. This presence, when it becomes your center, gives you a kind of quiet strength. You no longer need to prove yourself to yourself. You no longer need to outthink your own fear. You simply stay. Stay with the breath. Stay with the uncertainty. Stay with the moment that doesn't have a label yet. And in that staying, you start to feel truly free. Because freedom doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from letting go of the need for answers. It comes from trusting that awareness is enough, that you are enough, that the unknown is not a gap to be filled, but a space to be lived. Tonight, let yourself rest in that space. Let yourself not know. Let your breath lead you deeper into the part of you that doesn't need to explain, that doesn't need to decide, that doesn't need to understand right now. Just presence, just awareness, just being. And in that being, clarity will come, not as something you chase, but as something that arrives when the chasing stops. Not knowing is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the space where truth can finally breathe, where peace doesn't hide behind answers. It waits in the silence that asks for nothing, and trusts everything. And now that resting in the unknown has been revealed not as a weakness, but as wisdom, now that the compulsive urge to resolve everything has been softened into presence, a deeper question starts to rise. If peace can come from letting go, why does the mind still pull toward old habits? Even with awareness, why do the same reactions return? Why does the same worry, the same fear, the same pattern come back even after it's been seen? The answer is not punishment. It's not failure. It's the natural unfolding of something subtle and powerful, karma of the mind. In Buddhism, karma is not some supernatural reward and punishment system. It's not fate. It's not destiny. It simply means action, cause and effect, repetition. What you do with your attention, your speech, your thoughts, and your intentions lays down grooves in consciousness. The more you walk a path, the easier it is to keep walking that same way. The deeper the groove becomes, the harder it is to change direction. This is how mental habits become karma. Not just what you think, but how you think. How quickly the mind jumps to conclusions. How easily it spirals into defense. How it moves toward blame, worry, resentment, or self-doubt without being asked. These are not personal flaws. They are patterns. And patterns become ruts when they're not interrupted. Most people don't see these ruts because they've lived in them for so long. The response feels natural, the emotion feels automatic, the thought feels inevitable, but none of it is fixed. The mind is just practiced, and what it practices becomes its path. If the mind constantly practices reactivity, it becomes reactive. If it practices fear, it becomes fearful. Not because it wants to suffer, but because it doesn't know there's another way. Karma of the mind isn't something happening to you. It's something happening through you. And once you see this clearly, something powerful becomes possible. Conscious choice. The ability to interrupt the pattern, not by force, but by awareness. Not by pushing it away, but by choosing not to feed it anymore. This is where freedom begins, not in avoiding old thoughts, but in responding to them differently. When a familiar worry arises, you can pause, breathe, recognize the pattern. Instead of reacting, you witness. Instead of spiraling, you stay. That moment of staying, of doing nothing, is the beginning of new karma, a new groove, a new path that leads away from suffering, not deeper into it. Thoughts will still come, emotions will still rise, but your relationship to them starts to shift. You no longer act on them just because they're loud. You no longer believe them just because they're familiar. You stop rehearsing them, replaying them, reinforcing them, and in that stopping, they begin to dissolve. Buddhism teaches that every moment of mindfulness is stronger than thousands of unconscious reactions, because awareness interrupts the cycle. It doesn't erase the past, but it rewrites the momentum. Every time you notice the pattern and don't feed it, you lay down new karma. Not tomorrow, not after years of practice. Now. This is not about perfection. You will forget. You will fall into old habits. That's okay. The power is not in never falling. It's in returning, in seeing more quickly, in recovering awareness sooner. That recovery is what transforms old karma into new possibility. And the more you practice this, the more sensitive you become to the small spaces where suffering starts. You catch the first hint of tension in the body, the first flicker of judgment in the mind, the first tight breath before a reaction. These are the seeds. Most people miss them. They only notice suffering when it's fully grown. But with practice, you begin to feel it in its earliest form. And in that early noticing, you get to choose something else. This is why mindfulness is not just relaxation, it's revolution. Because it changes where your life is being shaped. Not on the outside, but in the moment you decide whether or not to follow a thought, whether or not to believe a story, whether or not to add one more layer to the same reaction you've played 1,000 times. Old thought patterns don't go away just because you want them to. They go away when they're no longer useful, when they no longer serve a purpose. And they stop being useful when you stop using them to manage discomfort, when you stop using them to avoid presence, when you stop using them to reinforce an identity that is ready to fall apart. And yes, it may feel like you're walking uphill at first, because the grooves are deep. The mind will slide back into them out of habit. But you're not failing, you're reconditioning. And that takes patience, compassion, and most of all, consistency. The key is not to fight the thoughts, it's to stop fueling them. Every time you bring attention back to the breath instead of the story, you're breaking the karmic chain. Every time you feel the emotion without reacting, you're rewriting the script. Every time you let silence answer where words once defended, you're stepping out of the old loop and into something freer. Even the smallest shift matters. Because karma builds moment by moment, and liberation does too. It doesn't come in one dramatic breakthrough. It comes in the thousands of tiny moments where you say no to suffering and yes to awareness, where you say no to the conditioned mind and yes to presence. This is how healing happens, not all at once, but through repetition. The same way pain became automatic, peace can become natural. The same way the mind once raced, it can learn to rest. The same way patterns once ruled, presence can return. And the most beautiful part is this: you don't have to wait. You don't need to be more advanced. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to pause, to notice, to choose, again and again, until choosing presence becomes your new habit, until awareness becomes your new momentum, until the karma of your mind reflects your freedom, not your past. So tonight, notice the thoughts that return, the stories that replay. Don't resist them. Don't chase them. Just watch. Feel their shape. Feel their pull. And let them pass. You don't have to fix them. You just have to stop following them. And in that stopping, you create a new path. One thought at a time, one breath at a time, one moment at a time. This is not mystical. It is practical. It is possible. And it is already happening. And now that the grooves of mental karma have been brought into view, not with shame, but with awareness, you start to see just how deeply some thought patterns have carved themselves into your inner world. Not only as habits, not only as familiar reactions, but as something more painful, more hidden, more personal. Beneath the repetition, beneath the speed, beneath the urgency, there's a subtle form of harm, a quiet attack happening from within. Overthinking isn't just exhausting. It can be a way the mind turns on itself. Not with violence the world can see, but with loops that wound from the inside out. This isn't always obvious, because overthinking often looks responsible, careful, analytical. It wears the mask of being thoughtful, prepared, even wise. But beneath the surface, there's a cost. When thinking no longer clarifies but shames, when it no longer helps but punishes, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a cycle of inner aggression. Not because you're cruel, but because you're hurting. Buddhist practice invites us to look at this clearly, not to judge it, but to understand it. Chronic thinking, when left unchecked, can become a form of self-rejection, a loop that says, "You should have done more, you shouldn't have said that, you can't rest yet, you're not enough." These thoughts may sound like problem-solving, but what they're really doing is reinforcing a belief that you're not allowed to just be, that you must always be fixing, analyzing, reviewing, repairing something about yourself. And that belief creates pain. Quiet, hidden pain. The kind that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves you exhausted, disconnected, unable to trust stillness. Because stillness, to the overthinking mind, feels dangerous. It feels like failure. It feels like vulnerability. But it's not. Stillness is where healing begins. And to reach that stillness, you must first see how the mind may be punishing itself through thinking, how it may be using analysis to avoid feeling, how it may be replaying the past not to understand it, but to relive the shame. And that recognition isn't meant to create guilt, it's meant to create space. Space to meet the suffering underneath the spiral with something completely different. Compassion. Not the soft, vague idea of compassion, but direct, embodied compassion. The kind that sees the loop and says, "You don't need to do this to yourself anymore." The kind that sees a racing thought and responds with breath. The kind that sees the urge to over-process and gently asks, "What are you afraid of feeling right now?" Because at the heart of overthinking is fear. And often that fear was learned. At some point, the nervous system decided that thinking was safer than feeling, that predicting pain was safer than being surprised by it, that explaining everything was safer than being misunderstood. These were survival strategies, not flaws, not weakness. But they stayed too long, and now they cause harm. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often continues long after the original pain is gone, not because life is cruel, but because the mind keeps repeating the wound. It circles around it. It examines it. It replays it. And this circling creates new suffering, not because you deserve to suffer, but because the mind doesn't know how to stop. That's why the path forward isn't critique. It's kindness. Deep, steady, unshakable kindness. Because overthinking can't be solved with more thinking. It has to be met with presence, with softness, with the willingness to feel what the mind has been trying to outrun. This begins with noticing the tone of your inner voice, not just what it says, but how it says it. Is there pressure, judgment, panic? Is there blame disguised as logic? Is there urgency when none is needed? These are signs, not of failure, but of pain trying to protect itself. And when you start to notice that tone, you can begin to change the relationship. Instead of reacting to the thought, you respond to the wound underneath it. The thought might say, you messed up again. But the wound says, I'm scared to be unworthy. The thought might say, you need to figure this out. But the wound says, I'm afraid of being left behind. The thought might say, you can't relax. But the wound says, I don't feel safe enough to stop. This is where healing happens, when you stop believing the thought and start listening to the pain behind it. When you stop spiraling and start soothing, not with explanations, but with presence, with breath, with stillness. And in that stillness, the body begins to soften. The nervous system begins to trust. The spiral begins to slow, not because the problems are solved, but because the war inside is ending. The mind is no longer turning on itself. It's being held, seen, respected. Overthinking often tries to fix what can only be healed, and healing doesn't come from analysis. It comes from love, from attention, from the willingness to feel instead of flee, to soften instead of solve, to rest instead of repeat. This doesn't mean you'll never overthink again. The grooves are deep, the habit is strong. But now there's another option. There's a pause, a breath, a new way of relating to the mind. And that new way grows stronger every time you choose compassion over critique. You begin to notice sooner. You begin to soften faster. You begin to stop spirals before they start. And when you don't, when the spiral runs anyway, you meet it with kindness, not shame. You say, this is the part of me that's scared. This is the part of me that learned to think as a way to feel safe. And I'm here now. I see it. I won't abandon it. That's the voice the mind has been waiting for. Not one that fixes, one that stays, one that doesn't turn away just because the thoughts are dark or messy, one that says, I love you even here, even now, even like this. And that kind of voice, that kind of presence, starts to heal what overthinking has been covering. It reaches the root, the grief, the shame, the unmet need, and it meets it not with analysis, but with care, not with solving, but with stillness. So tonight, as thoughts come, notice their tone, notice their urgency, and ask yourself, what is this thought trying to protect me from feeling? Don't rush to answer. Just stay, just listen, just breathe. Because maybe the overthinking isn't the problem. Maybe it's the signal, the flare the wounded mind sends out when it doesn't feel safe. And maybe now, with awareness and love, you can answer that signal differently. Not with more thinking, but with peace. You are not your thoughts. You are not your spirals. You are the presence that sees it all, and the compassion that holds it all. That's what breaks the cycle. That's what ends the self-harm. Not perfection, not silence, but love. And now that the loops of overthinking have been revealed not just as habits, but as subtle forms of self-harm, now that you've seen how mental spirals can be acts of inner violence disguised as problem-solving, something softer begins to awaken. A new kind of seeing, not through effort, not through control, but through clarity. Because once the mind stops attacking itself, it becomes possible to watch it, not manage it, not manipulate it, just observe. And this observation, gentle, steady, non-reactive, is where deep freedom begins. This is the heart of Vipassana, insight into the truth that thoughts are not permanent, they are not personal, they are not solid. They are like clouds, forming, shifting, dissolving, never staying, never sticking, unless you try to hold them. Vipassana means to See clearly. It's not about changing thoughts. It's not about controlling the mind. It's about watching thought as it is, watching without becoming it, feeling the movement of the mind without needing to stop it. And in this watching, something begins to change, not the thought, but the way you relate to it. You stop grasping, you stop resisting, and in that space, thought loses its weight. The mind is used to attaching to every thought that arises. This is important. This is me. This is truth. But when vipassana is practiced, those thoughts are seen differently, not as facts, but as weather, as momentary appearances, as shapes passing through the sky of awareness. Some are bright, some are dark, some stay longer, but none of them last. None of them define you. None of them are who you are. This insight doesn't come from philosophy. It comes from practice, from sitting in stillness and letting the thoughts rise without pulling you in, from noticing the stories without joining the narrative, from watching a storm form in the mind and letting it pass without building a shelter. You feel the tension come. You feel the thoughts swirl, and you just stay, with breath, with body, with presence. Over time, this changes the way the mind operates. It stops expecting permanence. It stops demanding resolution. It learns to let go in real time, not because it's trying to escape discomfort, but because it no longer believes discomfort will last forever. Even pain, when seen clearly, begins to shift, because the suffering isn't in the pain, it's in the belief that the pain is permanent. Vipassana teaches you to sit inside the wave, not run from it. To feel the rise, the peak, the fall, without commentary, without labels, just sensation, just thought, just awareness. This seeing is not passive, it's active in its stillness. You're not checking out, you're checking in so deeply that you stop reacting. You stop chasing, you stop trying to fix what was never broken. Because thought isn't a problem, identification is. When the mind believes every thought, it suffers. When the mind observes every thought, it becomes free. This is what Vipassana reveals again and again. The thoughts are not the issue. It's the attachment to them, the fear of them, the resistance to them, the belief that they are permanent or personal. But thought is not solid. You can feel this in meditation. A thought appears, you watch it. It stays for a few seconds, maybe a minute. Then it fades. Another comes. It too fades. This happens 1,000 times, and you start to see the truth. Nothing in the mind stays. Nothing needs to be held. Nothing needs to be answered. Even thoughts that return again and again are not the same. They are recreations, variations, ghosts of the original. And when you watch them without grasping, they start to lose their grip. They start to dissolve. Vipassana is not about pushing thought away. It's about letting thought be itself. Just like a cloud. You don't push a cloud, you don't grab it. You just watch it pass, and that's the practice. Thought arises. You see it. You breathe. You stay. Thought passes, and you are still here. This kind of seeing builds confidence, not in your intellect, but in your awareness. You start to trust that presence can hold anything, that no thought is too much, that no wave is too big, because you felt them rise and fall, over and over, and you're still here. This builds equanimity, a balanced mind, a mind that doesn't panic every time something uncomfortable arises, A mind that doesn't jump into every story. A mind that can sit in stillness while storms come and go, because it knows the sky is untouched. This also brings compassion, because when you see your own thoughts clearly, you stop judging others for theirs. You stop needing people to agree with you. You stop reacting to every word, every opinion, every behavior, because you know it's all weather, it's all movement, it's all passing through. And in this way, seeing clearly doesn't just heal your inner world, it changes how you live in the outer one. You listen more, react less, love deeper, judge softer, because you're no longer trapped in your own mind. You're no longer at war with thought. You're no longer trying to control the sky. You've remembered how to watch. This watching becomes your refuge. Whenever the mind gets loud, you return to awareness. Whenever a storm starts building, you anchor in breath. You open your senses. You let the cloud pass, and it always does. Not because you made it go, but because that's what clouds do. That's what thoughts do. They come, they go. The suffering only stays if you hold on. And when you stop holding on, something remarkable happens. Peace appears, not as an idea, as an experience. A quiet, spacious presence that isn't disturbed by anything the mind creates. It's always been there, hidden behind the clouds. Vipassana just shows you how to see it. Tonight, let that seeing begin. Let thoughts arise. Let them move. Let them fade. Stay with your breath. Stay with your body. Stay with the watcher. Don't chase. Don't fix. Just see. Because what you see clearly, you no longer fear. And what you no longer fear, you no longer fight. And what you no longer fight sets you free. Thoughts are not the problem. Believing them is. Grasping them is. Fearing them is. But when you let them float, when you let them pass, when you remember that they are clouds, not you, then you remember who you are, not the storm, not the weather, but the sky. And now that the mind has begun to release its grip on the clouds it once clung to, now that thoughts are seen not as commands but as passing weather, something even deeper starts to reveal itself. Beneath the movement, beneath the rising and falling of inner storms, beneath the silence between them, there lies a question that most never think to ask. If thoughts are just passing events, why do they still cause so much pain? Why do they still shape reality so powerfully? The answer is not in the thoughts themselves, but in what the mind does with them. It's not the thought that causes suffering, it's the belief, it's the identification. It's the moment when the mind says, "This is true," and stops looking any further. In Buddhist teaching, this moment is called fabrication. The mind doesn't just record reality, it builds it, it shapes it. It interprets and filters and rearranges based on its own habits and conditioning. What appears in your experience is not raw truth. It is a constructed view. It is perception shaped by memory, emotion, expectation, fear, and bias. And when the mind forgets this, suffering begins. Not because reality is painful, but because the version of reality the mind has created becomes a trap. This is the core of mental suffering, mistaking thought for truth, mistaking a passing narrative for fact. A thought arises. They don't care about me. I'll never succeed. This always happens to me. And instead of seeing it as a mental event, the mind grabs hold. It builds a story. It attaches emotion. And suddenly, it's no longer a thought. It's a world. This process happens fast. So fast, it feels automatic, but it can be seen. And when it's seen clearly, it can be interrupted. Not by force, not by arguing with the thought, but by remembering that the thought is not the problem. The belief is. The unquestioned acceptance is. The moment of forgetting that this is not reality, it's a lens. The mind is not trying to deceive you on purpose. It's doing what it was trained to do. From early life, the brain learns to create patterns, fill in gaps, draw conclusions. That's how it keeps you safe. But the same mechanism that helped you avoid danger can also become the reason you stay stuck. Because the mind doesn't know how to distinguish between a useful pattern and a painful one unless awareness steps in. This is where the Buddhist path offers something radical. It doesn't tell you to replace bad thoughts with good ones. It doesn't tell you to build better beliefs. It tells you to see clearly, to recognize that what you're calling truth might just be repetition, that what you're calling who I am might just be a collection of mental habits. Seeing this requires humility, the willingness to say, maybe I don't know what I thought I knew, not just about the world, but about yourself, about others, about the future. It means loosening the grip on the stories you've used to explain your life. It means turning toward each thought and asking, is this true or just familiar? The practice begins in stillness. When a thought arises, pause, feel it, look at it. Where does it come from? Does it have a shape in the body? Does it carry emotion? Does it sound like an old voice you've heard before? And most importantly, is it trying to protect you or punish you? This question matters because many beliefs are not supportive. They are inherited, conditioned, internalized voices from the past, teachers, parents, peers, repeating judgments that were never yours to begin with. And yet, the mind repeats them because repetition feels safe. Familiarity feels like truth. But they are not the same. Thoughts are not inherently harmful. But when they are believed without question, they become chains. Beliefs form identities, and identities, once solidified, resist all change. You start defending the very thoughts that are keeping you stuck. You cling to the pain because it feels like who you are. Buddhism invites a different path, not to fight the thoughts, but to look at them with curiosity, to create a small sacred space between the thought and the belief. A space wide enough for awareness to step in and say, this is not who I am. This is not permanent. This is not the whole truth. When that space opens, even for a breath, freedom enters. The thought still arises, but it doesn't define you. It moves through, but it doesn't build your world. You can feel sad without believing the mind's conclusion. You can feel doubt without building a story of failure. You can feel anger without becoming someone who is broken. This is the wisdom of clear seeing. Vipassana deepens it. Mindfulness holds it. And compassion makes it safe. Because you're not just observing thoughts, you're unlearning years of mental construction. You're dissolving the wall between perception and reality. And that takes patience, gentleness, and the deep trust that truth doesn't have to shout. It just needs space. Even beliefs that feel empowering can be traps. I am strong. I am successful. I always get through things. These can feel helpful, but they're still identities. They still create pressure. Because now, when life becomes hard, you feel like you've failed your own image. The deeper peace comes not from building a better identity, but from not needing one at all, from being present without labeling, from being alive without explanation. Thoughts will still come. That doesn't change. But your relationship to them becomes soft, spacious. You listen without obeying. You notice without collapsing. You stop defending what no longer serves you. And in that, the mind starts to feel less like a battleground and more like a river. Moving, but not dangerous. Alive, but not in charge. This is what it means to be free. Not to never think, but to no longer be ruled by thought. Not to avoid stories, but to see them for what they are. Clouds passing through sky. Echoes, not commandments. Possibilities, not prisons. So tonight, as thoughts appear, let them. Don't force them to go. Don't follow them into story. Just notice. Feel the space between the thought and the belief, and breathe into that space. This is where freedom begins. Not in silence, not in control, but in remembering that every thought is optional. Every belief is a choice, and reality does not need your mind's permission to be at peace. You can watch thought rise and not ride it. You can feel thought burn and not believe it. You are not what your mind tells you. You are the one who sees, and the seeing is enough. And now that the veil over thoughts has begun to lift, now that the illusion of belief has been softened by direct seeing, what once felt like a mental battlefield begins to feel quieter, not silent, not blank, but lighter. Thought still arises, but it doesn't stick. Stories still form, but they don't take over. And here, in this gentle quiet, the mind meets something it isn't used to, a space it doesn't know how to describe, a presence that doesn't explain itself. It is not numbness, it is not dullness, it is emptiness, not as absence, but as clarity. And this emptiness is not something to fear, it is something to practice. In Buddhist teaching, emptiness, called shunyata, is often misunderstood. People hear the word and assume it means void, blankness, a life without meaning. But that's not what emptiness is. Emptiness is not a lack. It's a space so vast that nothing can be trapped. It's a mind so open that no single thought can define it. And this is where mental freedom begins, not in knowing more, not in thinking better, but in experiencing emptiness as a skill. The skill of emptiness is not about emptying your mind of thoughts. That would be impossible. Thoughts come, they always will. The skill is in letting them arise and fall without letting them define your identity or control your attention. It's learning to hold thought the way the sky holds clouds, completely, but without clinging. This requires a shift. Most people use thought as structure. They build identities from it. They measure success with it. They plan futures and analyze pasts through it. Thought becomes the frame they use to see the world. But that frame also becomes a cage, because anything not supported by the structure is rejected. Any silence feels like something is missing, and so they fill the space with noise, with analysis, with internal commentary. But space is not something to be filled. It is something to be respected. Emptiness is what allows truth to move freely. It is what gives perception the room to breathe. Without emptiness, every thought becomes heavy. Every moment gets judged. Every emotion is assigned meaning, and the mind never rests. Mental emptiness is not a passive state. It is active receptivity. It is what allows you to witness without controlling, to feel without labeling, to be fully alive without attaching to every thought. It's what gives the mind room to stretch, to settle, to return to its natural rhythm. To understand this, notice what happens when the mind isn't busy. There may be discomfort at first, a sense that something is missing, that something needs to be done. But if you stay with that discomfort, you start to notice something else beneath it. Peace, a subtle pulse of aliveness, a clarity that doesn't need to think to understand. This is the wisdom of emptiness, not silence imposed by force, but silence revealed by not interfering. When you stop clinging to thoughts, what's left is not boredom, it's presence. What's left is the mind returning to its original nature, open, vast, undisturbed. This kind of emptiness can be trained. You don't need to escape to a mountaintop. You don't need to meditate for hours. You just need to stop chasing every thought. You just need to begin relating to inner space the way you relate to outer space, not as something scary, but as something necessary. Because emptiness allows beauty. Without space, a song is just noise. Without space, a painting is just clutter. Without space in your mind, you can't hear what matters. You can't feel what's real. Everything is drowned by interpretation, evaluation, prediction. But in emptiness, there is listening. There is patience. There is truth. The practice is simple. When a thought arises, let it arise. Watch it. Feel it. But don't hold it. Don't feed it. Let it pass, and rest in what remains. That rest is not nothing. That rest is where presence lives. Mental emptiness is not checked out. It's not apathy. It is alert stillness. It is what allows the mind to be soft without being weak, to be open without being confused, to be quiet without being empty in the negative sense. This shift from belief to space creates a completely new relationship with thought. You stop trying to control the mind. You stop fearing what it might say. Because now you know thoughts will come and go. But the space remains, and that space is where you are free. This also changes how you relate to other people. When your mind has space, you listen better. You don't fill the silence with assumptions. You don't respond from habit. You respond from presence, from emptiness that isn't void, but capacity. This capacity allows emotions to move too. When you're not stuffing the space with thought, you can feel deeply, fully, without pushing away, without grasping. Emptiness becomes the field where all experience can rise and fall without turning into suffering. In meditation, this is where the deepest insights come, not during the thinking, but during the gaps, the moment after an exhale, the pause between thoughts, the stillness that isn't waiting for the next thing, but is complete as it is. You start to realize that the spacious mind is the wise mind, not because it has more knowledge, but because it has less clutter, less noise, less conditioning. In that space, compassion rises naturally. So does clarity and ease. This doesn't mean you live without thought. It means thought no longer fills every inch of awareness. It means you have choice. You can use thought when needed, and you can rest in space when it's not. The more you practice, the more this becomes natural. You speak with less rush, you move with less tension, you think with more precision, because your thoughts aren't trying to cover silence, they're supported by it. This is the skill of emptiness. It's not about stopping life, it's about making space for it. Space to feel, to breathe, to be. Space for life to unfold without you needing to narrate or control it. So, tonight, don't fear the quiet. Don't rush to fill the space. Let the emptiness open. Let it show you that nothing is missing. That presence doesn't need a script. That peace doesn't need more thoughts, just more room. Because when you learn to rest in emptiness, you stop seeking refuge in noise. You stop mistaking silence for lack. And you remember that the mind doesn't need more. It needs less grasping, less labeling, less interruption. And in that less, there is more than enough. And now that the spaciousness of emptiness has been allowed to unfold, not as absence, but as presence, not as void, but as the very ground of clarity, something more primal begins to stir underneath. Thought may have softened, silence may have widened, but awareness hasn't stopped deepening. In fact, it's begun to shift direction, downward, inward, away from the sky of mental space and toward the earth of the body. Because even before the mind begins to spin, the body already knows. Long before thoughts spiral into stories, the body has already felt the signal. The wisdom is there, waiting to be heard. And when the mind doesn't know what to do, it's the body that tells the truth. There is a kind of knowing that doesn't need language. It doesn't need conclusions or analysis. It's the quiet communication of breath, muscle, pulse, and posture. The way the stomach tightens before the first anxious thought appears. The way the jaw clenches before anger becomes a word. The way the chest constricts before fear is fully formed. This is not random. It's not coincidence. It's intelligence. Not the mind's intelligence, but the body's. In Buddhist practice, this body-based wisdom is essential. It grounds presence in something real, something undeniable. Because thoughts can lie. They can fabricate, distract, or distort. But the body doesn't lie. It responds, it reflects, it reveals. And when awareness returns to the body, thinking loses its compulsive hold. This isn't about rejecting thought, it's about remembering what comes before it. When uncertainty arises, the mind often rushes to explain, to organize, to find safety through understanding. But understanding that isn't rooted in sensation becomes disconnection. You get lost in the clouds again, and forget that the ground is still beneath you. The body is the ground, and mindfulness of the body is the return path. You return by noticing where the breath stops short, where the shoulders lift, where the hands curl. You return by scanning slowly, not to fix, but to feel. And in that feeling, thought becomes less urgent, because the body is speaking a language far older than words. And that language says, you are already here. Each moment you pause to feel your feet on the floor, your spine upright, your chest expanding with breath, you interrupt the loop. You interrupt the spiral of imagined futures and replayed pasts, because the body is always now. It can't be anywhere else. And when you return to it, the mind begins to follow. This is especially important when the mind becomes overwhelmed. Obsessive thinking is often a trauma response, a learned strategy for avoiding discomfort. But the body holds what the mind avoids. It stores the residue of what hasn't been processed, the tension of what wasn't allowed, the heaviness of what was never named. And when that residue is ignored, it leaks into thought. It turns into worry, rumination, repetition. But when it's felt, directly, gently, without judgment, it begins to release, and thought no longer needs to do its frantic work. This doesn't require a technique, just attention. Attention that is patient, curious, slow. You don't have to interpret the body. You don't have to understand every sensation. You just have to feel it, to stay with it, to let it move if it needs to move, to let it tremble if it needs to tremble, to let it breathe itself open again. When you train yourself to feel before you think, something changes. A space opens between the trigger and the spiral, between the uncertainty and the reaction. That space is the beginning of wisdom, not because it solves the problem, but because it reminds you that you don't have to react. You can respond, and response begins in the body. You begin to notice your own signals, the early whispers of contraction, the subtle signs of overwhelm, and instead of powering through, you pause, you breathe, you listen. That pause is not avoidance, it's presence. It's where the body gets to be part of the conversation instead of being dragged along behind the mind. And the more you do this, the more the body becomes your anchor. You no longer need to chase mental clarity in every moment. You begin to trust your sensations. You begin to move from intuition, not just logic, from grounded awareness, not just reactive thought. This is not spiritual fluff. It's biological truth. The nervous system speaks through sensation. It tells you when you're safe, when you're overloaded, when you need to slow down, when you're pushing past your own limits. And if you ignore those messages, the mind will compensate. It will try to solve what the body simply needed you to feel. This is why so many people stay stuck in overthinking. They're trying to solve a feeling with thought. They're trying to explain a contraction instead of softening into it. But the body doesn't want an explanation. It wants your presence. It wants your breath. It wants your willingness to stay without trying to fix it. This becomes a new form of mindfulness. Not just watching the mind, but inhabiting the body. Not just labeling thoughts, but sensing energy, temperature, texture, pressure, vibration, noticing what arises and what fades, without judgment, without resistance. Even movement becomes a form of mindfulness. Walking slowly, stretching gently, feeling the rhythm of motion as a way to reset the nervous system, letting physicality become meditation. Because sometimes stillness isn't what the body needs. Sometimes it needs to be felt in motion, to complete a pattern, to release a loop, to come home again. This is not a one-time shift. It's a lifelong practice. The mind will always try to lead, but the body will always know. And the more you listen, the more you trust. You stop needing perfect thoughts. You stop needing certainty, because you're anchored in something deeper, more honest, more whole. So tonight, when the mind begins to stir, feel the body, before the thought, before the story, before the worry. Feel the feet, feel the breath, feel the chest rising and falling. Let the ground hold you. Let sensation speak. Let presence return. Because the body was never separate. It was just waiting to be heard. It was waiting to remind you that you are already here, already whole, already home. And now that the body has begun to speak in its own language, now that awareness has returned to the rhythm beneath thought, it becomes easier to see what the mind was trying to protect all along. Not just comfort, not just clarity, but something much more fragile, the self. That sense of I that has always been there, quietly claiming everything. My fear, my future, my sadness, my success. That voice beneath the voice saying, "This is who I am." But what if that voice is the very root of the storm? What if the self that clings so tightly is the one feeding the endless spin of overthinking? Buddhist insight invites a radical shift. It doesn't try to strengthen the self. It questions whether the self exists the way we assume. It doesn't say you are broken. It says you are misidentified, that what you're calling me may just be a bundle of habits, stories, fears, and memories trying to hold themselves together. And when that bundle starts to feel threatened, the mind gets loud. Thought spirals begin, not because something is wrong, but because the identity holding them feels like it's dissolving. Overthinking, in this light, is no longer just a mental habit. It's self-preservation. The constructed self depends on stories. It needs interpretation. It thrives on labeling, comparing, evaluating. It builds a sense of control through endless inner narration. And when that narration is interrupted by silence, by presence, by not knowing, it panics, it reaches, it grasps, it analyzes, not because the problem is urgent, but because the self needs a role to play. This can be seen in the way the mind reacts to uncertainty. A moment of pause is immediately filled with commentary. What does this mean? What should I do? How does this make me look? These aren't neutral questions. They're attempts to protect a fragile identity, to maintain a stable narrative of who you are, where you're going, and how others see you. But that narrative is not you. It's a structure, a mental echo of past experience. It was built over time, through praise and rejection, through trauma and success, through culture and memory. And because it was built, it can be deconstructed, not destroyed, not denied, but seen for what it is. A process, a pattern, not a fixed thing. When this is seen clearly, the need to overthink begins to weaken, not through effort, but through disinterest. If the I at the center of the thought isn't as solid as it seemed, the thoughts built around it begin to lose urgency. The mind doesn't need to defend a self that isn't under threat. It doesn't need to solve a self that was never broken. This insight doesn't require deep philosophy. It just requires observation. Watch how thought says I and then builds a whole world around it. I feel rejected. I need to prove myself. I can't fail. But what is this I? Where is it? Is it in the body, the mind, the voice, the memory? Can you find it directly? Or is it always inferred, always assumed, never clearly seen? This is not abstract. This is practical. Every time you get caught in thought, pause and ask, who is thinking this? Is this a habit, a reaction, a voice from the past? And what happens when I stop feeding it? You'll begin to notice that the thoughts don't go away, but they don't have the same grip, because the one they were protecting starts to dissolve, and in that dissolution, a new kind of freedom opens up. A life that doesn't have to revolve around defending or perfecting a story of self. A mind that can rest in presence without needing to explain everything. This doesn't mean you lose your identity. It means identity becomes softer, more fluid, less of a prison. You can still function, still speak, still think, but you don't build your worth on every thought. You don't cling to every belief. You don't react to every perceived threat to the ego, because the ego is no longer the boss. In meditation, this shift becomes especially clear. When you sit long enough, the mind begins to slow, and in that slowing, the I becomes harder to find. There's awareness, there's breath, there's sensation, but the voice of me fades, not in a scary way, in a peaceful way, like waking from a dream you didn't know you were in. And from this space, thoughts still arise, but they don't hook, because the hook was the belief in the thinker. When that belief softens, the whole machinery of overthinking begins to unwind. This also changes how you meet emotion, because emotions tied to identity are stickier. I am anxious is heavier than anxiety is present. I am unworthy is heavier than a thought of unworthiness is here. The first attaches, the second observes, and observation opens the door to compassion, not for a broken self, but for a mind that's been carrying too much for too long. When the self becomes less solid, compassion becomes more natural, because you stop seeing others as threats. You stop seeing life as personal. You stop reacting as if everything is about you. And from that space, generosity flows, forgiveness flows, humor flows, because you're not protecting a fragile self anymore, you're living. Even relationships begin to shift. You listen more deeply, you speak more honestly, you let go of needing to be right. Because being right doesn't matter as much when you're not defending a self-image. What matters is connection, clarity, freedom. And these are only possible when the I is not in the center of every moment. So, how do you begin to live from this place? Not by eliminating the self, but by seeing through it. By noticing how often thought begins with I, and asking, is that real, or is that just a thought? By staying present with sensation instead of clinging to narrative. By softening into the space between words, between reactions, between identities. And most of all, by trusting that you don't need to be someone in every moment. You can just be. You can move, breathe, respond, without a script, without a mask, without constantly reinforcing the illusion that you are what your mind says. This is not the loss of self. It is the return to true self, not the self of story, the self of silence, of presence, of awareness, that which was never broken, never lacking, never afraid. So tonight, as thoughts rise, notice who they're speaking for, who they're protecting, who they're describing, and ask gently, is this who I really am? Or is this just the voice of habit? Because when the voice of habit fades, the need to obsess fades too. When the I is no longer the center, the mind doesn't need to spin. There is nothing to protect, nothing to prove, nothing to become. Only this breath, only this moment, only this quiet truth beneath the noise. You were never the thinker. You were the awareness that saw it all. You've just taken a journey through the deepest layers of the mind, a journey not to add more noise, but to dissolve it. You've seen how overthinking isn't the enemy. It's a signal, a symptom, a habit born from fear, from identity, from craving. You've traced it back to its root and discovered that beneath every spiral there is space, there is stillness, there is a choice. You've learned how to let go of the second arrow of suffering, how to feel